Chapter 678. Was she really pregnant? Gloria had a complicated expression on her face. She was surprised and worried at the same time. Because of Soren's special existence, if the two of them had children, there might be some accidents. There were no more than 4 kinds of descendants of gods: true gods, abominations, demigods, and mortals. First of all, the probability of a true god being born was very small. At the same time, there was a certain uniqueness. At present, the most powerful descendant born from a god was the goddess of agriculture. However, her parents were not ordinary gods. One was Mother Earth from ancient times, and the other was the most powerful god, the god of light. The goddess of agriculture was born at the level of a true god. She directly inherited part of her mother's power and then took over the priesthood of agriculture when she became an adult. The second kind was the abomination. In the long history, many abominations were born among the gods, but most of them had been sealed. Abominations could be the descendants of gods, and they could also be the descendants of gods and mortals. The probability of an abomination appearing was not small. They were very scary creatures. However, one thing that was special was that most of the abominations were the descendants of the gods' original bodies, in the form of gods, and other creatures. The incarnation of the gods could not do this. Therefore, the abominations were born in other planes. In the past, there were gods who came to the material plane to kill them. This also caused the abominations to be basically a legend in the mortal world. Then there was another kind of descendant, demigods. The existence of demigods was special. They were incomplete gods. They were not true gods, but they were not mortals either. They inherited part of their parents' power, but they did not have a complete divinity. The probability of demigods appearing in history was also very small. Many of them stayed in the gods' kingdom because many gods in this world liked to mate. These demigod descendants might be the guides and hold important positions in the gods' kingdom. Usually, they would rarely appear in other planes. The last kind was mortals. Of course, even if mortals were the descendants of gods, it was impossible for them to not inherit any power. It was just that the power they inherited was even smaller. The probability of not inheriting any talent or power at all was probably smaller than the probability of an abomination being born. The son of fear. The divine son of massacre. These children of God that had appeared in history were all mortals. Vivian was a mortal descendant of a god. For a long time, her power did not awaken until one day, her talents suddenly awakened and she began to inherit the divine power from her father. The probability of such offspring being born was also relatively high, especially if only one of the parents was a god. The most likely situation for an abomination to be born was when both parents were gods. In this case, for unknown reasons, the probability of an abomination appearing was a little scary. Gloria was worried about the abominations. They were terrifying existences filled with the desire to destroy. They were a kind of twisted life form, and they could also be the world's punishment for the gods. After all, the gods themselves were immortal. The only fortunate thing was that because of the Avatar crisis, Soren was not in the form of a real god, but in the form of a saint between a god and a mortal. Logically speaking, the chances of a divine abomination being born in such a situation would be much lower. When did I get pregnant? As a legendary witch, Gloria had a strong sense of perception. She vaguely felt that a life was being born in her body. Although she was not 100% sure whether it was true or not, this feeling would become more and more clear as time passed. This discovery made her a little panic, but she soon calmed down. She decided to hide this matter for the time being and not tell anyone, including Soren. When she was sure that she was pregnant, she would choose the right time to tell him. Although she never knew what spurred Soren to move forward crazily, Gloria knew that Soren had been actively dealing with something. Maybe it was a great crisis. Gloria gently stroked her belly with her hand, and her expression gradually calmed down. Then a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and there was an inexplicable motherly aura around her. She murmured, "When was it?" As the Avatar crisis approached, the number of times Soren made out with her was obviously not as much as before. During this time, Soren had been learning magic like crazy. According to the time, there were only 2 times that might lead to pregnancy. Gloria thought of this, and a blush appeared on her face. She murmured, "It can't be the first time. That time, I ate them all. In that case, then it can only be that time in the astral realm? Could it be that she got pregnant because of this? Astral realm." Gloria's eyes flashed with the scene of the past. She felt that she seemed to have discovered something, but there was still a trace of worry in her eyes. Autumn fall. The second migration of the half-elves had begun. Soren must take advantage of the first snow of winter to send people back to Mordor as much as possible. Otherwise, when the snow blocked the road, it would be quite difficult for these people to go to Mordor. Moreover, the cold ice and snow may take away some people's lives. The winter in these 2 years was much colder than before. The portal could no longer be used. The power of the temple had to be reserved to deal with the Avatar crisis, and the expenses of Mordor were already very large. Before the income of the Abyss arrived, Soren must reduce some of the expenses. A huge army. There were 12 towns that were being developed near Mordor. These 2 were the most important. At present, most of the income of Mordor was filled in these 2 holes. If it were not for the occupation of Treasure Island, overseas trade alone would not be able to support it. "My lord." The old archbishop came to Soren and bowed slightly. "The first batch of believers has been sent away. However, we found traces of the half-orcs at the border. They seem to be investigating us." "Half-orcs?" Soren frowned when he heard this, and then said in a deep voice, "Don't worry about them. As long as they don't attack, everything will go according to the original plan." Ascendant, Eugene. This was a rare far-sighted half-orc. It should not choose to attack the half-elves at this time. That would lead to further escalation of the conflict. Soren was very annoyed by the arrival of winter, and Eugene also had a headache because of the coming winter. If he attacked in this case, Soren would have to pay a high price. But similarly, if Soren decided to retaliate because of anger, at least half of the half-orcs would die this winter. This was a situation where both sides would lose. As a far-sighted leader of the half-orcs, Eugene should not be so stupid to attack Soren now. A large number of people began to move south. However, there were still some people who were unwilling to leave. It was a difficult decision to go overseas. Many members of the Noble Council finally decided to stay in autumn-fall. If the half-orcs attacked, they would choose to retreat to the elven forest. As nobles among the half-elves, many of them had blood ties with the nobles within the elves. This was the rule of the whole era. Only the descendants of nobles could easily become nobles, and ordinary civilians must struggle for several generations to only become an ordinary knight. This deep-rooted order spread throughout the material plane. Otherwise, Soren's layout in the Wind Spear Hills would not need Adele Isabella to climb the blood connection with the other party. Everything was going on in an orderly manner. As the fleet of Raging Sand Island approached the nearby sea, Soren's migration was almost guaranteed. At this time, he finally had time to return to Mordor City and deal with the problem of population settlement. Mordor City would certainly not continue to accept more outsiders. The overcrowded environment would make the whole city dirty and messy. These people could only be distributed to nearby towns that were being developed. According to Soren's plan, there would be 12 large towns with more than 5,000 people near Mordor City. After returning to Mordor City, Soren finally had a little free time. But what surprised him was that on this day, a very special visitor came to Mordor City. Lady of Silvermoon. This mysterious lady still did not appear in her true form. Her avatar was directly teleported to Mordor City, and in order to express her goodwill, the Lady of Silvermoon immediately sent a message to Soren after arriving, telling him of her visit. It was a little unexpected. The lady did not come at night, she chose to come during the day. The divine sense allowed Soren to directly find the other party's location. With a magic aura, Soren's figure was teleported to the cliff outside Mordor City. The Lady of Silvermoon stood on the towering cliff overlooking Mordor City. After noticing Soren's appearance, a faint smile appeared on her face, and she slowly said, "It's a very good city. It reminds me of a place called Silvermoon City." Silvermoon City. Soren was silent when he heard this. Of course, he knew Silvermoon City, and he knew that this place, which used to be the most prosperous city in the material plane, had now become a ruin. The northern witches were built on the ruins of Silvermoon City, and the magic lock of the Witch Council was part of the magic lock of Silvermoon City. Silvermoon City and the Lady of Silvermoon naturally had a very special relationship. The other party must have mentioned the city at this time to express some special meaning. It may mean that the gods were immortal, and no city could be prosperous forever, but it may also mean something else. "I once tried something similar to you." The Lady of Silvermoon looked down at the bustling Mordor city in front of her. Her sight seemed to include every corner of the city. Her bright white face showed a trace of reminiscence, and she whispered, "At that time, Silvermoon City was like this, maybe better than this, full of vitality, freedom, enthusiasm, and hope." The Lady of Silvermoon's expression gradually became gloomy, then she smiled and shook her head. "I hope you will succeed." The gods all wanted to change the material plane. They wanted to change the world in the direction they wanted. The Lord of Light wanted the world to be full of justice and kindness, the Lady of Wealth wanted the world to have prosperous trade, the Goddess of Agriculture wanted to make agriculture more prosperous, and so on. The gods' changes to the material plane had all kinds of changes after colliding with each other, and finally evolved into a balanced situation. Mordor City was Soren's hope. To some extent, it was also the starting point of Soren's hope to change the world. "Do you know?" The Lady of Silvermoon smiled slightly, and her attitude seemed to have become much friendlier. Maybe it was because both of them had put a lot of effort into a certain city. She looked at Soren in front of her and slowly said, "This place is not quite the same as I imagined. I thought that a new god like you, who was promoted from a mortal, would only make your territory as foul as Dark Sun. Note, another name for the god of murder. But the truth is very surprising. I see a lot of different things here, although I don't like the harsh order here. Maybe you should give people more freedom." "Freedom?" Soren's mouth twitched, but he didn't answer the Lady of Silvermoon's words. Because talking about freedom at this time was completely suicidal. The chaotic and kind Lady of Silvermoon. "Don't you like to die? As one of the ancient gods, how could you fall to this point? Look at the Lady of Night, she's doing well." The Lady of Silvermoon couldn't help but frown. As the chaotic and kind Lady of Silvermoon and Soren, as the lawful and evil Lady of Silvermoon, there were too many subjective conflicts between the two sides. It was impossible to form many similar views. "I met the Lady of Agriculture." Soren's silence made the Lady of Silvermoon have to continue. She slowly said, "She suggested that I come to Mordor City, so I came here. I have a lot of questions here. Because I found that you are not as evil as I thought. Maybe it's because of this that the Lady of Agriculture chose to cooperate with you. But I still want to know one thing. That is, what do you want? What you are doing doesn't seem to belong to the duties of the gods. I can see that you want to change something." The Lady of Agriculture wanted to change the world. Her ideal was very simple, but it was also very difficult. She wanted to make agriculture and the material plane completely prosperous, and she hoped to rely on the food production brought by agriculture to reduce the conflicts of many races in the material plane. However, this kind of thing was very difficult to achieve, because even if there was enough food, the greed and desire in human nature would still cause a lot of conflicts. But in terms of the basics, if she could achieve her dream, she could reduce the chances of famine. "What do I want?" Soren frowned when he heard this. Of course, he would not tell the truth to a god of the opposite camp, but he would not tell a lie because there was no way to deceive her at all. So, Soren said the following: "I want the old to have someone to rely on, the strong to be useful, and the young to be strong. Everyone can rely on their own efforts to live a better life. There are some orders in this world that I don't like very much. Although I accept them, it doesn't mean that I like them. If it's possible, I want to change some things. At the very least, I want to change it as much as I can." Lady. You certainly didn't come here because of these things. You must have something more important to tell me, right? The Lady of Silvermoon couldn't help but tremble. After a long silence, she shook her head and chuckled. I'm surprised. What you said is actually true. Although this is not your real purpose, it is something you really want to do. I've never seen a god of the evil camp like you. Maybe you should consider switching to the good camp. I believe that many good gods will accept you. The Lady of Silvermoon paused for a moment, then said, well, I did come here for an important thing. But it's just to return a favor. The Shadow Lord seems to be targeting you. He covets the clergy of rogue and tracking that you have mastered. Maybe you should be more careful in the future. The radiance of divinity appeared. The Lady of Silvermoon really came and went as she pleased. After saying these last words, her avatar directly opened a portal and disappeared from Soren's sight. This was not surprising at all. It was because the people of the chaotic good camp acted like this. They were too casual. P.S. The 4,000-word chapter is presented, and the status is gradually recovering. Chapter 679. Was the Lord of Shadows going to deal with him? Soren stood in place and fell into deep thought. The sea breeze blowing in his face carried a hint of fishy smell. At a glance, he could see the fleet coming and going in the port of Mordor. This place was full of business opportunities and wealth. It could only attract those businessmen who pursued money because there were too many people moving around. Even if Soren had a large number of rogues under his command, there was no way to cover everything. There were many eyes and ears in the periphery of Mordor City, and there might be believers of the Lord of Shadows among them. Soren could only firmly control the inner city, and at most, he could only set up more informants in the area near the port. Soren was not surprised that the Lord of Shadows was hostile to him, because there were too many conflicts between the two. Even if the Lord of Shadows did not want to deal with Soren, Soren would still have to fight with him in the future. Because the Shadow domain was also a shadow, rogue, clergy, and because both sides were gods who mastered the same law. But now the Lord of Shadows seemed to have decided to take the initiative to deal with Soren while his foundation was not stable. I'll deal with whatever comes my way. Soren stood in place and thought for a long time, but he did not think of a suitable way to deal with it. Because the Lord of Shadows was the same kind of god as him, Soren had no way to grasp his whereabouts, and it was difficult for him to determine Soren's location. Because he was in charge of the clergy of rogue, Soren's church had trained many elite rogues, but as a god who mastered the clergy of shadow, there were also many good rogues in the church of the Lord of Shadows. Their strengths were similar. Although Soren was at a disadvantage, it was not very obvious. In this case, the best way was to wait for the Lord of Shadows to reveal himself first. At least he was safe in Mordor City. If the Lord of Shadows dared to attack him directly, Soren was 80% sure that he would stay forever. However, Soren had a fatal weakness. That was Vivian. The little girl had not returned to Mordor City yet, and she, who was determined to face her fate, might not be willing to stay behind Mordor City all the time. But at this time, he couldn't care less. Soren was prepared to bring Vivian back himself. If she didn't agree, he would forcefully take her back. If the Lord of Shadows wanted to use her against Soren, then he would be in a very passive position. Vivian was his lifeblood. He couldn't let her run around anymore. Soren immediately prepared to bring Vivian back, but before that, he had to inform Gloria and Fallen Witch not to run around and pay more attention to the abnormalities in Mordor City. When the Avatar crisis officially began, the Shadow Lord would not have so much energy to deal with Soren. The reason was simple. He would become a target to be hunted. After the Avatar crisis officially broke out, a super boss of the evil camp, Lady of the Night, would also appear in the mortal world. This goddess of the evil camp had always coveted the priesthood of Shadow. The fragile alliance between the Shadow Lord and her only took effect when they used each other. At that time, both of them were in their god's kingdom, and it was basically impossible to have a more intense conflict. But now that both gods had fallen to the mortal world, it was hard to say whether the fragile alliance agreement between them could be maintained. The Shadow Lord must be very afraid to see the Lady of the Night now, which was why he had been hiding. He might have the idea of accumulating strength to deal with the Lady of the Night by targeting Soren. A day passed in the blink of an eye. The undercurrent of the material plane did not have much impact on the bottomless abyss. After all, the gods fell to the mortal world, and it was impossible for them to fall to the lower planes. However, the situation in the bottomless abyss had become more and more turbulent recently, mainly because many demon lords with priesthood and evil gods who had placed their god's kingdom in the bottomless abyss had disappeared. Sauron heard a news from the mouth of the Ross demons, that was, the Blood Sea, in the bottomless abyss, which was the kingdom of the goddess of misfortune, had now been completely closed. The evil merchants could not go through the Blood Sea to the lower planes, and could only go back and forth from other planes through the Styx. The Blood Sea was closed. The whereabouts of the goddess of misfortune was unknown. The bottomless abyss was now in a situation where there were no leaders everywhere. Many of the weaker demon lords were not affected by the Avatar crisis, and now they all stayed in the lower planes. Taking advantage of this opportunity, these demon lords fought with each other, wanting to improve their strength before these powerful demon lords returned. Chaos spread. In the third layer of the bottomless abyss, the Forgotten Land, dozens of big and small guys who claimed to be demon lords emerged overnight. Golumba Arena. After such a long time of preparation, Sauron was finally ready to attack the interior of the arena on this day and completely conquer the remaining demons and goblins. Fire. With Sauron's roar, the battle broke out at dawn. The reason why it took so long was that the demons in the bottomless abyss were too stupid. Few demons knew how to use the heavy artillery sent by Sauron's body. He tried to train the artillerymen, but in the end, he found that the low-grade demons were too stupid, and the middle-grade demons were too reckless. These brainless guys would rather go up and kill people than stay behind and fire. In the end, Sauron had no choice but to let the succubus who served him be the artillerymen. Succubus were very smart demons. After a period of training, these succubus were soon able to use the artillery skillfully. The overall strength of the material plane was not as good as the bottomless abyss, but the artillery still had great lethality here. With the roar of the artillery, the Golumba arena was completely suppressed in an instant. After 3 rounds of artillery suppression, the demon army under Sauron's command began to charge. On the side were the mercenaries from the demons. They were driven to charge bravely for the sake of profit. The artillery fired 6 times, and Sauron waved his hand to signal the succubus to stop attacking. In the bottomless abyss, production was extremely low. Basically, ammunition could only be replenished from the material plane. The remaining ammunition had to be saved to deal with the enemy in the future. Under the cover of the artillery fire, some demons had already rushed to the walls of the Golumba arena. At this moment, Sauron also pulled out a huge beheading sword. His body was burning with raging flames, and he flew directly to the center of the enemy's front line. There was a goblin demon warlock holding a scepter. He was originally the right-hand man of the demon lord, but now he had become the leader of the demon goblins. "Master, I'm here to give you a hand." A coquettish voice rang out. The lady boss of the Furnace Tavern also flew up at this moment. She was a high-grade succubus, and she knew very well how to please her master. Now that the situation on the battlefield was completely suppressed, she immediately took the opportunity to show her loyalty. The berserk demons rushed toward the entrance of the Golumba arena like a tide. Sauron's body was burning with raging flames, like a sharp knife stabbing into the enemy's front line. He raised his hand and a flame whip gathered in his palm. The beheading sword spun 360 degrees and beheaded 5 to 6 demons. Then, with a swing of the flame whip wrapped around a goblin demon warlock and dragged him directly in front of him. The target was then engulfed by the raging flames around his body. In the blink of an eye, the target was burned into a piece of charcoal. This was the orthodox fighting style of the Balrog. They loved to drag the enemy to their side and burn them to death with their flaming eyes. Burn them to death. Let the flames purify everything. In the raging flames, another Balrog appeared on the other side of the battlefield. It had a pair of bull horns, a burly body, huge demonic wings, and bull-like hooves. Sauron's ally had arrived on the battlefield. It lit up the surroundings with raging flames, and then rampaged through the line of demons and goblins. Only when it was surrounded by a large number of enemies would it use greater teleportation to escape the encirclement. The two Balrogs formed a pincer attack, and soon a large number of enemies died in their hands. The city wall has been taken. The berserk demons jumped down from the city wall one by one. The enemies guarding the city wall had all been killed. Now, the army of demons and goblins had shrunk extremely, almost holed up in the inner city of the Golumba arena. The slaughter was increasing Sauron's power. When he killed a soul judgment demon, the accumulated demonic power erupted again, directly causing a new mutation in Sauron's body. A row of data appeared in front of him, ability upgrade. Balrog form evolved into Balrog, elite form. You've mastered a new ability, cleave. You've gained immunity to lightning, poison, and fire damage. Your ability, summon demon, has been upgraded. Your ability, dominate demon, has been upgraded. A raging fire was ignited. With a slight crackling sound from Sauron's bones, his body grew bigger again. Now he was close to 4 meters tall, and his weight had probably reached more than 3,500 pounds. At the same time, his attribute page also changed. Name, Sauron. Race, demon. Form, Balrog, elite, grade 5, large otherworld creature, crossplane, evil, level, creature level 24 attributes, strength 32, agility 21, constitution 27, intelligence 21, wisdom 21, charm 24 alignment, lawful evil. Note, other demons will be slightly hostile to your actions. HP, 381415 demonic power, 153000 skills, sneak 195, deception 155, negotiation 155, literacy 170, intimidation 300, spellcraft 150, use magic device 150, listen 135, scout 135, search 110. Abilities: gaze of fear, aura of fear, body of flame, whip of flame, bind, demon claws, +1 natural magic weapon, demon skin, damage reduction +10, demon resistance, all types of resistance +10. Abilities: cleave, dual wielding, proficiency in preemptive attacks, multiple attacks, weapon mastery, beheading sword, heterogeneous weapon mastery, whip, fierce attack. Spell-like abilities: soul manipulation, telekinesis, blasphemous words, greater teleportation, fear, cast at will, fireball, 5 times a day, instant cast, dominate demon, once a day, burning hand, summon demon, telepathy. The eyes of the entire battlefield were attracted by Sauron, who seemed to have advanced. At this moment, he looked like a huge burning human-shaped flame, which made the temperature of the entire Golumba arena seem to have risen a lot. It was as if they were close to a hot lava area. The aura of a demon close to the leader level spread. Many demons and goblins were full of despair. They began to put down their weapons and knelt on the ground, trembling. Evil and powerful beheader, Sauron. We are willing to submit to you. We will serve you as our master. Like a chain effect, after the first demon and goblin surrendered, a large number of enemies began to surrender. In the end, even the goblin demon warlock who commanded the battle put down his staff with a pale face. He looked a little uneasy and walked towards Sauron. They had failed. Now they could only pray that the other party would not kill them all. Otherwise, this group of demons and goblins would never recover from this setback. Chapter 680. Enslavement was more valuable than killing. There weren't many creatures in the abyss that knew how to create, and the demons were one of the smarter ones. That was why Sauron quickly accepted the captives who surrendered. However, this was the abyss after all, and it was necessary to show his brutality appropriately. Since these people dared to resist Sauron, some of them had to pay a painful price. Demons didn't appreciate kindness. On the contrary, a cruel and merciless ruler was more likely to gain their approval and make them obey orders more easily. The battle gradually stopped. Sauron's figure appeared on the throne in the center of the Galumba arena. This was a seat prepared for the demon lord. Only the very important death arena could allow the original goblin demon lord to appear. Now, this was Sauron's throne. His huge body sat on it, and two charming succubus maids were massaging his shoulders on his left and right. Below him was the unusually obedient succubus boss, who was carefully massaging Sauron's thighs. Sauron's demons were on the left side of the arena, while the demons led the mercenaries on the right side. In the middle was a group of captives who surrendered. At this moment, they were waiting for their fate, and all of this depended on Sauron's thoughts. Suppress those at the back. These people will become slaves and laborers. Sauron glanced at the demons and goblins behind. These were captives who weren't strong enough. He could keep them without worrying about any trouble. However, when he turned his gaze to the high-grade goblins in front of him, his target became a lot colder. These were the core elites of the demons and goblins, and many of them were close to becoming high-grade demons. Naturally, he couldn't use the same method to deal with these people, so Sauron thought for a while and said in a deep voice, "I will give you a chance. Some of you will be able to survive. Not only can you survive, but you can also regain your power and status. But those losers will not be so lucky. The Galumba arena will reopen in 3 days. You will be the first batch of gladiators. The winner will regain his status and power and will be rewarded by me. Losers have no value. I don't need useless trash here." Demons and goblins were of the same race, so it was easy for them to band together. Although they had already surrendered to Sauron, it was hard to avoid the possibility that some of them would join forces to do something behind the scenes. Therefore, Sauron could not take all of these captives, and he might need to suppress and divide them in the future. In order to avoid such a troublesome matter, Sauron simply let them kill each other first. As for these powerful high-level demons and goblins, Sauron planned to let half of them die first. This way, in order to survive, the other half would be filled with hatred and competition between each other in the process. You die, I die. Sauron's words instantly made many of the demons and goblins wary of each other. If they had to participate in the death arena to survive, anyone around them could become their opponent. Sauron was satisfied with this. As for losing some of their battle strength, it didn't matter at all. One could always recruit powerful fighters in the bottomless abyss as long as one wasn't afraid of them challenging and overthrowing one's rule. Besides, it was necessary to celebrate the reopening of the Galumba arena with a death arena. Sauron's goal was not only to weaken and divide the demons and goblins, but also to declare his existence and rule to the surrounding demons. The battle ended. Next, it was naturally time to divide the spoils of war. The wealth of the demons and goblins had been plundered and there was basically nothing of value to be found. However, since they had already conquered the Garuba arena, Sauron naturally had to divide the territory outside the Garuba arena to the demon merchants who had participated in the battle. An Anababa, a night witch, and a Yugoloth demon. The three of them were currently the leaders outside the Galumba arena. The 3 most prosperous streets were divided by them. Obtaining these territories was equivalent to having their own foundation in the 3rd layer of the bottomless abyss. As long as Sauron as the demon lord didn't fall, he couldn't violate the contract that he signed. According to the contract, these territories could be operated independently. Sauron didn't care about a small territory. What he wanted was the Galumba arena. This huge circular arena was the key to his rise in the bottomless abyss. A landmark building was also beneficial for him to stand out from the other demon lords. Many times, recruiting in the bottomless abyss depended entirely on whether the demon lord's reputation had spread far enough. Sauron had a lot of ideas in his mind about how to operate this huge circular arena. Of course, it was necessary to use benefits to attract people. If possible, Sauron intended to build this place into a huge cross-plane arena. Perhaps it would be of greater use in the future. Meanwhile, in the city of Mordor in the material plane, Vivian, who was not very happy, and Lulu, who was full of joy, had been caught by Soren. The little girl seemed to be addicted to being a cult master recently. No matter how intelligent Vivian was, she was still a child after all. Trying to manage such a large church for the first time would definitely be filled with all sorts of novel and interesting things. However, Soren couldn't let her stay out there any longer. The Shadow Lord wasn't like any other enemy. His methods were similar to Soren's. If he were to attack Vivian in secret, it would be too late to stop him. The most important thing now was to deal with all changes by remaining unchanged, and forcibly drag it out until the Avatar crisis completely broke out. Just like that, day after day passed. In the blink of an eye, a week had passed. After a lot of effort, the first batch of residents of Loia City was also sent to Mordor City. These people were first placed in tents near the port of Mordor City, and then sent one by one to the nearby towns that were being developed. The arrival of this group of half-elves attracted a lot of attention. Many of the half-elves who originally came here even ran out to look for their relatives and friends. They had been living in Mordor City for a long time. Compared to the situation of the first batch of half-elves who arrived in Mordor City, the treatment of the second batch of half-elves was obviously much worse. This difference made many half-elves who came here earlier feel fortunate. Because if they came a step later, they would have to go to the villages in the suburbs. Everything was going on in an orderly manner. Soren never liked to keep idle people. So starting tomorrow, these people would be arranged to work. At the same time, the third wave of expansion in Mordor City would begin. A road directly to the port and connecting 12 towns would begin to be built. Chapter 681. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. The situation on the mainland had become more and more turbulent, but everything in Mordor City was still calm. During this period, Princess Anna of the Frost Kingdom sent a few letters to Soren, mentioning a few things. Princess Royal seemed to be in retreat recently. With the arrival of winter, the Frost Kingdom also had to deal with the coming cold climate. Winter was a difficult time for this era of material poverty, but the better thing was that because of the arrival of winter, many wars were forced to stop, and the spreading plague was almost cured. The cold climate could make the plague disappear sooner. Although it had not yet snowed, the first frost had already arrived. Mordor City was slightly better because it was located in the subtropics. There was only some frozen soil, but many other places had already begun to freeze. The frozen soil slowed down the construction process a lot, but people were still busy working because if they could not finish the housing, they would be exposed to the northwest wind this winter. 5 kilometers away from Mordor City was a town under construction. The construction site was in full swing, and thousands of people were busy in it. Laying the foundation, building houses, and building walls. First, they had to settle down, and then they began to reclaim the nearby land. Half-elves had diligent and dexterous hands. As long as they were given a chance to work, they knew how to support themselves. At this time, Ryan, who had almost recovered from his injury, was patrolling the construction site. As the leader of these half-elven civilians, he naturally became their manager. If there was no accident, he would take over as the mayor of the first town. The people involved in the labor were divided into 2 factions. One was the half-elves of Autumnfall, and the other was the merchants from the south coast. Some farms were also built outside the town. The merchants paid more attention to profits, so some of the land had already begun to grow the first batch of winter wheat. Curdy. Ryan walked around the construction site and suddenly frowned. Where did Yerrick and Dandy go? Did the 2 of them go out to slack off again? Not all half-elves were very hard-working. Some of them liked to take risks and did not like boring work. Ryan was talking about the 2 guys who were idle. Soon, a young half-elf ran over and whispered, "They said they were going to catch fish last night and ran out at dawn. I haven't seen them yet." Catching fish? Ryan frowned when he heard this. There were rich aquatic products near the city of Mordor, but these half-elves who had just moved here did not have fishing tools, so they should not go to the sea to catch fish, so the biggest possibility was the nearby river. Because it was close to the Amazon rainforest, there were many fish in the freshwater river near the city of Mordor. Among them, the most tender and delicious was a kind of piranha, called tiger fang fish, tiger mouth fish. If there were many of these fish, they could eat a person until only the bones were left. They had extremely sharp teeth and liked to bite people's lower body very much. Therefore, it was very dangerous to go into the water naked. If one was not careful, they might only be able to use half of their body. Naturally, Ryan had eaten this kind of fish before, because there were too many of these piranhas, and they tasted very good, so they were often caught as a side dish. These two lazy bastards. When I catch them, I'll whip them a few times. This was not the first time. Not long after they came here, these two guys were lazy once. They rashly went to the river to catch fish, and they almost got bitten off by the fish. But because of this, both of them liked to roast piranhas. Usually, they would go after work, but today, they didn't even come to work, which really made Ryan a little angry. Letting the people next to him help watch, Ryan directly picked up his weapon and whip and was ready to go to the river. There were dangerous piranha flowers further away, and the two boys were not idiots. They would not run there, so they could only catch fish in the nearby river. Ryan naturally knew how to track. Judging the footprints on the ground and the plants that had been trampled, he quickly found the route that the two boys had taken. However, suddenly, there was a shrill scream in the distance, and then the birds and beasts around were scared away. Something's wrong. Ryan noticed that something was wrong in an instant. He instantly pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword, and then his whole body sprinted at high speed, rushing in the direction of the scream. The surrounding scenery quickly passed by. As a high-grade profession, Ryan ran extremely fast at full speed. In a few minutes, he passed through the dense jungle and approached the place where the sound came from. Dend? Ryan saw a half-elf boy covered in blood. At this moment, he didn't care about scolding him. He said anxiously, "What's the matter? What happened? Where's the other person?" The half-elf boy named Dend was covered in blood. At this moment, when he saw Ryan, it was as if he saw his savior. He grabbed him and murmured, "Alec is dead. He was eaten. Damn it." Ryan was so angry that he wanted to slap the guy in front of him. He had already warned them that the nearby river was very dangerous and not to run to catch piranhas. Now, he finally learned his lesson, but a young life was ended because of this. Ryan thought that the other half-elf boy was eaten by a group of piranhas, but Den's next words made him tense up. "Demon." The half-elf boy named Den said incoherently, "Eaten. Demon. Eaten. The demon ate Alec." Demon? This time, Ryan's face finally changed. He wasn't sure if the half-elf boy in front of him was scared out of his wits. Besides, he called the piranhas demons, or he really met a demon. There were many dangerous things around here, including piranha flowers and so on. Demon may refer to a real demon, or it may refer to something else. But this was the city of Mordor. Logically speaking, there should be no demons. But now, no matter what the reason was, as the supreme commander of this town, he had to investigate the situation. "Follow me." Ryan picked up the boy in front of him and rushed forward. Den still seemed to be afraid, but he knew Ryan's strength, so he still followed him timidly. The distance was not far. Soon, the vision ahead opened up, and Ryan, who saw the scene in front of him, couldn't help but take a deep breath. His expression became unexpectedly dignified. "Demon. It's really a demon." Chapter 682. And the number of these demons was not small. At this moment, a dense group of demons was gnawing on a corpse. The corpse had already been gnawed beyond recognition. White brain matter, bright red blood, and spilled intestines. Even Ryan, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, felt a little disgusted. The other half-elf youth was already dead. In such a short period of time, he was about to be eaten up by the hungry demons. Den was so frightened by the scene in front of him that his legs were a little weak. He fell directly to the ground and kept retching. "Zzzzzzz." The demons noticed the arrival of Ryan and Dend, and soon several figures rushed towards them. The number of these demons had reached double digits. The only fortunate thing was that their levels were very low. Most of them were the lowest level dretches. The rest were special abyss quarks, which were also a branch of small demons. Clang! Ryan quickly pulled out his sword and rushed up. These demons were not enough to threaten him. Although he did not understand why there were demons here, it was better to kill them all now. There were many ordinary civilians in the range of Mordor City. These civilians could not deal with the demons. Even the lowest level demons could easily cut open a civilian's stomach. The basic strength of the abyss and the material plane was still too far apart. The battle soon ended. It took Ryan a few minutes to kill all the demons, and the demons that wanted to escape were also shot to death by his bow. He frowned and glanced at the remains of the boy named Alec. Then he glanced at Dend, who was still weak in the legs, turned around, picked him up, and rushed outside. These evil demons appeared without any warning. It was too strange. For this matter, Ryan felt that it was beyond his ability, so he decided to report the matter first and let the higher-ups of Mordor City deal with it. Demons would not appear for no reason. He was afraid that this matter was not that simple. Soren was preparing to continue attacking the higher-ups of the Wizard Tower. During this period of time, Gloria's attitude was a bit strange. Soren could not tell what it was. Since she did not say anything, Soren did not ask much. However, just as he was about to continue exploring the interior of the Adept Tower, a message was sent directly to him from the guards. This news caught Soren's attention. He immediately notified Gloria after receiving the news, and they teleported to their destination together. Demons appeared in Mordor City. Although they were not very strong and there were not many of them, the way they appeared was extremely strange. It was as if they had appeared out of thin air. It should be here. Soren's expression was grim. In front of him were the corpses of the demons and the remains of a young half-elf. It should be the victim. The nearby area had been blocked by the Mordor City guards who rushed over, and the news did not spread out. Another boy who knew about it was temporarily locked up. At this time, it was better not to leak the news. It could easily cause panic among the ordinary people. Send someone out to search immediately. Soren glanced at the battlefield and ordered his guards, search the nearby area and see if there are any demons that escaped. Block this area and don't allow anyone else to come close. Yes. The guards standing behind Soren took the order and left. Soren took Gloria to follow the footprints left by the demons. They quickly passed through the dense jungle and arrived at a dark valley. It was a very inconspicuous little valley. With his god-level perception, Soren did not find any abnormalities. Gloria was also checking the surroundings, but her expression was very puzzled. After a while, Gloria stopped and murmured, "It's strange. There are no summoning circles. There are no traces left by others. It's as if these lower demons appeared here out of thin air." Soren was shocked when he heard this. Immediately, he fell into silence. Then he said in a deep voice, "I'll use telepathy to help you open the divine vision. You can check the nearby space." Space? Gloria looked up with a puzzled expression, but she quickly nodded and said, "Okay." The brilliance of divinity emerged. Soren's pupils emitted a golden brilliance. At the same time, with the power of telepathy, everything he saw was transmitted to Gloria's mind. Everything in front of them began to change. Space began to distort slightly. Everything seen at the divine level was completely different from what mortals saw. What's more, Soren was trying to master the power of space change. Something's wrong. Gloria's expression also became very dignified. She murmured, "The space here seems to be a bit distorted. I'm not sure what's the reason, but the space here is really unstable." It began. It seemed that the Avatar crisis had really begun. Hearing Gloria's words, Soren already had the answer in his heart, but he did not say much because he wanted to confirm it further. So he slowly said, "Can you set up a warning circle here?" I think the answer should appear soon. Gloria immediately nodded and said, yes. Soon. An exquisite warning circle had been completed. The two stayed in place for a while, and after confirming that there was nothing else, they quickly left. Half a day passed in a blink of an eye. When night fell, the warning circle set up by Gloria was suddenly activated. In an instant, both of them felt it, and then they were directly teleported to the valley during the day. The air in front of them seemed to be rippling. Soren saw that the space was gradually distorted, and then a small crack appeared. Through the crack, Soren could see hot magma. He could not determine where the other side of the crack was, but he was sure that it was somewhere in the abyss. Zzzzz. With a chaotic sound, some short dretch crawled out of the narrow crack in space. Through the crack, a huge berserk demon could be seen, but it seemed that it could not pass through such a small space. The crack in space lasted for a short time, less than a minute or two. Because of the fighting behavior of the demons, only 6 dretch crawled out of it. I think I know the reason. Gloria's expression was unprecedentedly dignified, and she murmured, "Is this what you have been worried about?" Soren did not answer. He gently raised his hand, and the dretch in front of him was caught. Then he directly crushed it into meat paste in the air. He slowly said, "This place must be sealed. I'm afraid there will often be demons running out here in the future." The crack in space closed. The whole valley was quiet. Except for the demon corpses on the ground, there seemed to be nothing unusual here. Chapter 683. Arendelle. The first snow of winter made this beautiful city by the sea covered in snow. This season was no longer suitable for going out to sea, so people gathered in small taverns to chat and drink in winter. The Black Reef Tavern near the edge of the port area was the most lively and popular place. Not only because there were barmaids full of southern flavor, but also because of the strong liquor from the south coast. A kind of purified liquor, stronger than most of the liquor in the Frost Kingdom. Such liquor was very popular in Arendelle in the cold winter. Naturally, the price was also quite expensive. The Black Reef Tavern was bustling with people. There were 3 floors here. The first floor was the tavern, the second floor was the housing, and the third floor was underground. It was responsible for dealing with some shady business. Of course, there were also gambling, dog fighting, and other entertainment. The entrance to the basement was not in the tavern. One had to enter from the back alley. Without a way in, one would not be able to enter. At this time, the lady boss of the tavern, Kelly, was washing the quilt. She was a mature woman full of charm and had a feminine voice that was completely different from those in the north. Many people tried to woo this beautiful and rich lady boss, but those who really knew her identity would feel their hearts skip a beat when they saw her. Because she was a very special woman. She came from the Amazon tropical jungle. An Amazon woman. Although she had a mature and charming appearance, and her every frown and smile was filled with flirtatious charm, only those who knew her well would know that this woman was also a very powerful killer. The door of the bar was pushed open. A man in a cloak came in, then shook off the ice and snow on his body at the door, gave a look to the bored lady at the bar, and then quietly went to the second floor of the tavern. The lady's eyes narrowed, then she motioned to the maid next to her to help watch, and quickly went upstairs from the other side. Urgent information. The man was already waiting upstairs. After seeing her, he quickly handed a document to her and said in a deep voice, "Special situation. It must be sent to Mordor City immediately." Kelly nodded solemnly when she heard the words, and quickly took the information into the basement through a secret door. At the same time, in this season of ice and snow, several knights outside the gate of Arendelle were also approaching quickly. Before they got close to the gate, they shouted, "Open the gate. There is important news that needs to be sent to the palace." The knight took out a token. Immediately after, the heavy city gates were opened, and they urged their horses to rush towards the palace. Arendelle Palace. Perhaps it was because of the arrival of winter that people began to become lazy. The eldest princess was unexpectedly lazing in bed today. Only when it was close to noon did she lazily let the maids dress up. She casually asked the leader of the maids beside her and learned that Anna still hadn't woken up yet. She was holding a book and reading it under the blankets. In winter, Arendelle would become very quiet and peaceful because the ice and snow had blocked everything. Many people would not even go out of their houses. Princess Royal. A burst of hurried footsteps sounded, and then a female guard rushed over and whispered, "Sir Dimorton has an urgent matter to see you." Sir Dimorton? Princess Royal frowned slightly when she heard this. She thought for a moment and recalled the identity of the person who had come. He was the lord of a small village near the south. Let him wait first. I'll be there soon. At this time, there should be no nobles who suddenly wanted to see her, so Princess Royal directly told her that something must have happened. Thinking of this, she could not help but rub her forehead. She looked a little tired. The plague had just been solved, and it seemed that something new had happened. Soon, Princess Royal's figure appeared in the palace hall. Sir Dimorton had been waiting there respectfully. When Princess Royal appeared, he did not dare to look at her. He respectfully bowed his head, but his voice was anxious. "Your Majesty the Queen. Demons suddenly appeared near the village in my territory. Although I have led the guards to destroy them, we found a dark and strange crack where the demons appeared. There was a very terrible sound coming from inside." Demons? Princess Royal's expression was dignified. In a flash, she appeared beside Sir Dimorton and said in a deep voice, "Take me to see it." A light of magic emerged. Before Sir Dimorton could react, he had returned to his village. At this moment, he was in the ice and snow, and the figure of Princess Royal was beside him. Incredible. Princess Royal's power made his eyes full of awe and curiosity, but before he could think more, Princess Royal said in a deep voice, "Where is it?" "This way," Sir Dimorton hurriedly said. The two quickly passed through a forest. At this moment, because of the arrival of winter, even beasts were rarely seen. The nearby air was filled with a very evil force, which made people feel depressed. "It's here," Sir Dimorton said with a dignified expression. Princess Royal's figure moved forward in the thick ice and snow. She didn't even leave a single footprint on the snow when she walked. At this moment, there was a dark crack in front of Princess Royal. There was a very strange and terrible sound coming from inside, and an extremely gloomy dark domain could be faintly seen. Unlike the plain crack that appeared in Mordor City, it did not close after opening, but directly formed a natural portal that was maintained in a more stable way. Such a situation was extremely rare. Only some closely connected planes could have such a situation. And it was almost impossible for such a naturally formed portal to appear in the material plane, not to mention that this portal was connected to somewhere in the abyss. Dimensional lock. The ice and snow around Princess Royal's body fluttered, and with the emergence of a huge force, Princess Royal tried to close the space crack in front of her. However, something unexpected happened. She failed. The space crack did not disappear. Instead, because of the intervention of her power, it seemed that the space crack had expanded a little because of the huge and automatic distortion force. This was something that Princess Royal had never encountered before. It seemed that some extremely chaotic force had interfered with her ability, and even the magic energy in the nearby space had a trace of chaos and restlessness. "Send someone to block this place immediately." The princess furrowed her brows and set up a special magic array around them. Then, she said in a serious voice, "Dispatch the nearby legions to guard this place. Seal off any news about this place. I will send the court witches to check it out. If there are any abnormalities, inform me immediately." Snowflakes fluttered. The surrounding ice and snow were controlled by a powerful force. In an instant, 36 staggered icicles were formed. There were strange ice and snow crystals on the ground, as if everything around was isolated inside. Chapter 684. Glorious City. A team of knights in silver-white armor was galloping. The armor of the paladins seemed to be shining in the sun. The farmers on the roadside saw them and could not help but bow their heads in respect. The team went south for more than 20 kilometers. Soon, a clergyman appeared. He quickly came to the front of the team of knights and respectfully said to the middle-aged man in the lead, "Your Excellency, the Silver Hand." The neigh of a horse rang out. The Silver Hand reined in the horse, looked at the clergyman in front of him with a dignified expression, and said in a deep voice, "How is the situation?" The clergyman quickly replied, "The enemy has been destroyed. The bishop is checking the nearby environment. The appearance of these enemies is too strange." This was the glorious city. It could be said to be the stronghold of the good camp in the material plane. The Church of the Lord of Glory had absolute control here. For thousands of years, no demons and devils dared to set foot on this land. But recently, for some unknown reason, not only did demons appear near the glorious city, but even the figures of devils appeared frequently. And the ones that appeared were not low-level devils. In a town near the north, the priest in charge of presiding over the temple was actually tempted by the devil. If it weren't for a high-grade paladin who happened to pass by there, perhaps people would not know that there was an evil and depraved devil lurking in this town. "Take me to see it." The Silver Hand looked around, and then said in a deep voice, "The matter here must be reported to the Pope. Send someone to inform him at once." A young paladin next to him responded, "Yes. Your Excellency, the Silver Hand." At the same time, 100 kilometers north of Autumn Fall, a vigorous figure was also leaping in the jungle. She had a slender figure and a pair of pointed ears. One did not need to look much to know that she was an elf. This elf had a strange tattoo on her arm. After landing, she suddenly turned into a black panther. She carefully sneaked along the grass and soon found the source of the bloody smell. There were traces of battle around, and there were pieces of broken bodies on the ground. Demon? Or devil? The Black Panther turned back into the tall elf droll. The girl picked up the strange horn left on the ground, as well as the broken limbs with dark red skin, and murmured, "No. I must report to Your Excellency the Earth Walker immediately, opposite Luoya City." Eugene's tall and sturdy body stood outside a newly built village. The departure of the gnomes made his mood a lot better because this meant that they had given up on this land. As long as he led his people to properly manage this place, the gnomes would not be able to take it back in the future. The arrival of winter made life difficult for the orcs, so they wanted to collect as much food as possible before the first snowfall in the south. But a very bad thing happened. The hunting team sent out by Eugene was almost completely wiped out. The only one who came back alive was Delirious. All he could do was shout, "Demon! Damned demon! I'll kill you all! Ha ha ha! Come on! Come and eat me!" It had already gone mad. Excessive violence and psychological stimulation could drive the half-orc crazy, and the news it brought back cast a shadow over Eugene's heart. Winter arrived. Before the winter completely enveloped the world, some irresistible changes were slowly eroding everything. Many of the lower-class civilians were still unaware of this, but the high-level rulers had already noticed this. Demons appeared. They not only appeared in their own territory, but also frequently appeared all over the world. In one night, the evil sects hidden in the material planes suddenly became active, especially the followers of the demon lords and archdevils who had developed in the material planes. Now, they were frequently operating in the dark, using the power of fear to recruit fallen followers. Mordor City. Soren slowly put down the information that had just been sent back, and then ordered in a deep voice, "Send out all the hidden sentries. There must be no fallen followers in Mordor City. Kill them all." The drow warrior standing outside the door answered, "Yes, my lord." "Sir Soren." The demon followers appeared. They used fear to confuse ignorant civilians, telling them that the terrible demons were coming to the mortal world. Only by joining them to serve the powerful demon lord, these mortals would not be attacked by the demons. To a certain extent, they weren't wrong. The demons might not attack these fallen followers. But if you wanted to join these fallen, you had to go through a very evil and bloody sacrificial ceremony. At that time, people could no longer be regarded as people. They used the fear of the demons to grow rapidly. In a short time, there were even traces of the fallen on the south coast. Soren's fingers tapped on the table gently. He was thinking about whether to tell the news to the people. In fact, after the frequent appearance of demons, many people in Mordor City had already heard the news, especially the well-informed merchants. They had spread the news to many places, but no one had brought the news to the surface yet. It was inevitable that this would cause a certain amount of panic. Soren was now thinking about whether to tell the ordinary civilians in advance, so that they could avoid the number of casualties. After all, it would be impossible to block the news until the new year. Finally, Soren decided to tell the news to the lower-class civilians slowly. Now, he would let some of the smart ones be aware of the situation first. There was no shortage of smart people in this world. So Soren directly issued a decree, ordering the city of Mordor to enter a state of slight preparation for war. Militia training. The decree from Soren was transmitted to the entire island through the city hall for the first time. At the same time, other places on the south coast quickly received the news. Mordor City entered a state of preparation for war. The decree clearly stated that all adult men, 16 years old or older, in Mordor City must receive militia-level combat training every 3 days. Training every 3 days, this had reached the training intensity of the auxiliary soldiers. Mordor City had a very large army. Whether it was a fleet composed of pirates or a legion recruited by civilians, the number had far exceeded most of the duchies on the south coast. Now that Mordor City had entered a state of preparation for war and began to train all adult men at the militia level, then the hidden meaning was worth pondering. Perhaps even the ordinary people could feel that something was wrong. Was there going to be a war? Chapter 685. The cold winter wind was getting more and more piercing. Even the city of Mordor, which was close to the subtropics, had a plummeting temperature. It was foreseeable that this winter would not be much better than last year, and no one knew how many homeless people could survive this winter. The temple in the central square was holding daily prayers. Perhaps because of the arrival of an unusual aura, the church's requirements for the believers were also much stricter. The large prayer that was originally once a week had changed to once every 3 days. At the same time, the half-elf craftsmen from Autumn-Fall began to make a large number of statues. The temple of the half-elf church was being expanded. Not only the great temple of Mordor, but even the 12 towns that had just been built were also building temples. Priests had already been sent to these places to preside, which was more of a source of faith for Soren. The Temple of Wealth was now somewhat withered. As trade on the mainland became more and more difficult because of the war, the faith of the Lady of Wealth was also seriously disturbed. Although the trade routes in the outer islands were still very active, they were probably down by about 30% compared to the past. Soren faintly felt that the divine power of the Lady of Wealth was decreasing. If there were not enough believers and sources of faith, then the power of the gods would become weaker and weaker. Therefore, the choice of what kind of divine title was very important. The Lady of Wealth needed to maintain the power consumption of the priest's prayers. If she did not give the priests divine power, then her church would be seriously hit. Giving the priests divine power required divine power. Divine power was converted through faith. The heavy damage to trade led to a decrease in faith, and the divine power naturally decreased. The decrease in divine power meant that it would become difficult to maintain the priest's divine power. In order not to form a vicious cycle, the Lady of Wealth could only give her divine power to the priests. This process would gradually lead to the decline of her divine level, and finally, she might fall to the level of lesser divine power. The chaos of war affected many gods. Not only was the power of the Lady of Wealth declining, but other gods were also constantly decreasing their power. They were even forced to reduce the divine power given to the priests to ensure that their own divine power was enough. But if this was the case, they might be able to support it for a short time. Over time, the priests who served them might switch to other gods, or even directly give up their faith in this god. Without divine spells, a priest would not even be able to defeat an ordinary warrior. Soren's divine power was getting higher and higher. After more than a month of accumulation, especially after the 2 incidents in autumn-fall, he had almost completed the control of the entire half-elf race. Therefore, his divine power was increasing rapidly. In addition to his own rule domain, he had now reached the standard to advance to weak divine power. Domination had a very surprising effect. Therefore, Soren recently discovered that the divine power points provided by rule wasn't only increased because of his wise leadership, but also because of the increase in population. In the beginning, Soren relied on rule to accumulate about 2 to 3 divine power points a day. This was the accumulation of divine power after deducting the divine power given to the priests, which was equivalent to the pure divine power of the gods. Recently, Soren had discovered that when Motor City once again accepted a large number of people from autumn-fall, his daily accumulation of divine power had reached an astonishing 4 to 5 points, which meant that he could accumulate at least 150 divine power points in a month. And this did not include the large prayer ceremony that was held once a week. Such a large prayer ceremony could provide Soren with more than 10 divine power points at once. If he chose a more bloody sacrifice, evil gods, then the divine power points obtained could reach more than 15. The sacrifice was too old and too primitive. Perhaps the sea goddess would accept the sacrifice and love it, but Soren would not try this kind of backward thing that would even affect the purity of his faith. Finally, with only 3 weeks left before the new year, Soren reached the point where quantitative change led to qualitative change. A row of data appeared in front of him. The rogue profession has leveled up to level 8. Received 41, DX 33 plus, INT 26 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 14, profession HP 6 plus, con 26 to 10, *0. 5. You've received a free attribute point. You've received a talent point. The huge amount of slaughter EXP required to level up as a wizard made Soren unable to do much at the moment. Therefore, he could only level up his rogue profession to level 6. Without a doubt, the free attribute points were added to his dexterity. He was only 1 point away from 35 points of dexterity. As for the talent points, Soren did not even need to think about it. Among the legendary accuracy, 9 deaths, lightning speed, and so on, he chose the legendary talent that would give him the biggest boost, insight into weakness. Insight into weakness, legendary talent. After countless battles and summaries, you have mastered a special ability. This ability allows you to discover any enemy's weakness. This will allow you to maximize your combat power. Relying on the ability of insight into weakness, you can launch sneak attacks on enemies that are immune to backstab. Insight into weakness can deal additional damage equivalent to the value of dexterity. Requirement: Epic Dexterity, Reflex Evasion, Legendary Battle Skill. One of the most powerful talents for melee professions. For a legendary melee professions, there were 3 legendary talents that could completely change their combat power. These 3 legendary talents were Whirlwind, Insight into Weakness and Perfect Dual Wielding. Whirlwind was needless to say. This should be one of the most terrifying legendary melee abilities. Only a few people in the entire material plane could master it. In addition to this ability, Insight into Weakness could provide a terrifying bonus for critical strike and critical strike. Perfect Dual Wielding could directly double the speed of a person's attack. In terms of combat power outburst, there were almost no melee legendary talents that could match the 3 legendary abilities. Now, Soren had mastered 2 of them. Perfect Dual Wielding and Insight into Weakness. Motor City, Temple. Soren's figure appeared in the center of the temple. Accompanied by a divine radiance, his figure directly floated in midair. Then, the power of faith that shrouded the temple began to rush into his body frantically. The dazzling light shrouded the temple, and many believers who saw it could not help but kneel on the ground. His divine power was constantly increasing. When it reached the critical point of 300 points, suddenly all the divine power began to be consumed. At the same time, Soren's body had some kind of special change. A row of data appeared in front of him, advanced to lesser divine power. The saint form has been upgraded. Magic immunity ring 1 to 4. Ability breakthrough. Automatically mastered, epic divine power. Epic divine power, legendary ability. Consume part of your divine power to add additional divine power damage to any of your physical attacks. The additional damage is equal to 2 times your own charm bonus. Note, the current charm bonus is 5 points, and each attack adds an additional 10 points of divine power damage. The quantitative change finally led to a qualitative change. With the improvement of his divine power level, Soren could not only master more powerful divinity abilities, but also increase his spell immunity level to level 4. Epic divine power was a legendary ability for priests. It seemed that Soren had also directly mastered it because of the promotion of his divine power level. At this time, his attributes were really a bit like a divine power. Name, Soren, saint form, lesser divine power. Race, half-elf, son of slaughter. Attributes, strength 22, plus 9, giant strength plus 6, dexterity 34, plus 4, vitality 26, plus 4, intelligence 26, plus 5, wisdom 19, plus 4, charm 20, plus 4. Alignment, lawful evil profession, level 8 rogue, 0826500, level 10 shadow dancer, max, level 10 wizard, 0897500, level 5 arcanist, 0109500, grade 6. Health points, 475475, strong. EXP, 165075, slaughter EXP, 7545, profession EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none. Attribute points, none. Legend level, 150. Divinity points, 71, lesser divinity. Requires 100 points to upgrade, intermediate divinity. Divinity points, 30, lesser divinity. Requires 100 points to upgrade, intermediate divinity. Divine power points, 13600. Requires 600 divine power points to upgrade to intermediate divine power. Master, space change, of the divine law. The limit of the divinity in the past was 600 points. Clergy, half-elf, rogue, tracker. Domain, slaughter, evil, domination, piracy, shadow. Aura, evil aura. Status, normal. Basic skills, sneak 395, literacy 325, steal 215, picklock 215, snare 180, focus 185, negotiate 355, appraise 125, deceive 215, intimidate 375, taunt 215, perform 155, listen 315, dodge 215, parry 185, block 125, heal 155, search 315, detect 325, scroll copy 95, spell identify 155, survival 325, use magic equipment 125, cooking 115, alchemy 155, forge magic weapon 185. Saint form, transcendence, spell immunity 1 to 4, epic divine power. Divinity abilities, reality change, form change, divine power shock wave, language proficiency, character proficiency, interplane communication, astral teleportation, plane teleportation. Legendary skills, expose weakness, perfect dual wielding, omnipotent hands, legendary evasion, legendary battle skills, epic dexterity, epic intelligence, epic constitution. Special abilities, life extension, eternal youth, God Slayer, blessing of the misfortune goddess, blessing of the ocean goddess, dragon blood baptism LV2, killing heart, slayer, death walker, ascetic, erudite, blasphemy. Personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance, encyclopedic knowledge, skillful spellcasting, reflex evasion, intuitive evasion, roll evasion, nimble movement, evade sight, dark vision, battle spellcasting, mobile spellcasting, spell control, empower spell, maximize spell, crafting magic equipment, spell penetration, minor magic resistance, minor cold resistance, medium fire resistance, minor poison resistance, minor electric resistance, robust, high regeneration, telepathy. 100 feet profession abilities, arcane memory, arcane counterspell, arcane runes, shadow dominator, flexible mind, military weapon, proficiency, curved sword, legendary. Battle skills, summon shadow, shadow jump, 300 meters, shadow strike, shadow jump, 2 times, fear gaze, divine, fear, divine, vampiric touch, divine, sword form, heavy slash, sword form, horizontal slash, sword form, beheading, sword form, waist chop, sword form, spinning strike, spinning slash. Currently, except for his wisdom, which was only 19 points, all of Soren's other attributes were above 20 points. Whether it was his basic attributes, abilities, basic skills, or other aspects, Soren had gradually caught up with the local gods. At his current level of strength, it would be very difficult for him to improve further. Whether it was a god-level increase in power or a professional level increase in power, the requirements would be much higher. Under normal circumstances, many gods' professions would reach their peak after one more level. Unless it was a powerful being, it would be very difficult to reach level 40. Lesser divine power was a process of qualitative change. From now on, to calculate Soren's challenge level, there would be an additional label of level 10 god of half-elves. According to the assessment of the adventurers in the previous life, Soren's challenge level should be about 25. In other words, only a team of adventurers who were all high-grade legends would have less than a 50% chance of killing him. Time passed little by little. Mordor City was enjoying the last tranquility before the arrival of the new year. The battle to attack the 3rd floor of the Wizard Tower was imminent. Vivian's accumulation was also close to the realm of demigod. The demon incarnation was frantically recruiting the army of cannon fodder. Gloria's research on the floating ring seemed to have a new breakthrough. At this time, there was only less than half a month left before the arrival of the new year. Maybe it was because the new year was approaching, the atmosphere in Mordor City was a little more relaxed. People were leisurely enjoying the tranquility of winter. However, when they heard from the merchants how many people had frozen to death, they couldn't help but sigh. The tavern was always the most lively place. During this time, a new kind of liquor had become popular on the south coast. Although the price was a little expensive, it was undoubtedly a great enjoyment to drink in the cold winter weather. There was a lot of noise in the tavern. In the corner near the left side, there were a few guys with bad intentions teasing a drunkard. It seemed that they wanted to see the drunkard make a fool of himself for fun. Such people were common, whether it was drunken drunkards or other guests looking for fun. The owner of the tavern looked at the group of people in front of him. Because the new year was coming, many fleets did not plan to go out to sea, so during this time, there were sailors, guards, and merchants looking for fun everywhere. There was a sound of dispute. The tavern owner wiped the table with a rag. At first, he didn't pay much attention, but suddenly he heard a word that made him alert, and then he listened to the conversation over there. Really? The drunkard's eyes were very blurred, and it seemed that his mind was not very clear. He said incoherently in a drunken voice, "Mordor, really, has an angel. I was at the beach that day, and I saw a beautiful female angel. So beautiful, that chest, that butt, it's so beautiful." The guests next to him who were purely looking for fun did not take the drunkard's words seriously. One of them smiled and said, "Don't tell me you think a beautiful woman is an angel when you see her. Haha. Look at how drunk you are all day, you probably think someone's wife is an angel." The drunkard's face turned red when he heard that, and he panted heavily, "Impossible, it's really an angel. I saw it very clearly. She seemed to be very scared when she saw me. A pair of snow-white wings suddenly appeared on her back, and then she flew away just like that." The people sitting around laughed and did not mean to take it seriously at all. However, the tavern owner who was bored at the bar came over at this moment and poured a glass of rum for the drunkard in front of him. He pretended as if nothing had happened and said, "Really? Then where did the angel fly to in the end?" The drunkard was already drunk, and he could not even speak clearly with his tongue. "South. South, angel, it's really an angel, you guys, don't believe me. I really saw it, with my own eyes, plop." The drunkard who drank too much finally fell down, but he was still whispering something in his mouth. It seemed that he had told many people about this, but no one took it seriously. The tavern owner returned to the bar. He called a bartender to watch over him, and then left from the back door. Late December. There were only a few days left before the new year. Perhaps because of the arrival of the new year, all the places were a little quieter. But today, a very strange thing suddenly happened in Mordor City. It was about 5:00 in the afternoon. Yesterday, Mordor City just had its first snow of the year, so the roofs looked white. The light in the afternoon was already a little dim. Just a moment before the sun set, a strange shadow suddenly appeared in the south of Mordor City, a place where almost no one usually went near the ruins of man-eating plants. A tall tower towering into the clouds. It looked like a mirage. It only existed for less than a few minutes, and then gradually disappeared. Chapter 686. At the same time. On the third floor of the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane, a battle against time had just come to an end. Soren's chest was heaving up and down violently. In front of him was a pile of metal parts that had been forcibly disassembled. In front of him was a mana generator that was still in good condition. The alarms around him had been deactivated, but the remaining arcane energy was still jumping around and forming electric sparks. Behind him were Gloria and Fallen Witch, who had stopped casting spells. Vivian was slightly injured, and there was a scorched mark on her chest. "Are you okay?" Soren quickly rushed over and raised his hand to cast Restore. Vivian was not badly injured, but the little girl was his treasure, and he did not care about wasting Restore's energy. The battle just now was very thrilling. The strength of this mana generator was much stronger than Soren had imagined. The level of the rune was probably around level 30. Only an arcanist could create a rune of this level, and it was a terrifying enemy that could challenge the old red dragon. Soren had actually used a trick to deal with it. Before the battle began, he had asked Vivian to cast Time Stop once. As a lesser god, Soren was immune to this spell. In other words, he had an extremely powerful opportunity to strike first. The time brought by this opportunity was not enough for Soren to kill a powerful mana generator that was made of abnormally strong steel. However, with his strength, he could destroy the energy transmission devices around the Wizard Tower before the mana generator could activate. Any puppet golem needed to be powered by energy. The more powerful the golem, the more energy it needed. Cutting off the energy supply in advance would greatly reduce the strength of the enemy. At most, it would not be Soren who killed it. After about 3 minutes of battle, the powerful golem stopped operating because of the lack of energy. This was extremely good news. Although Soren could not obtain the powerful energy contained in its soul core, it still meant that it had become Soren's trophy. As long as no energy was supplied, it would not restart. The surface of the magic-powered armor was full of holes, but Soren knew that it had only lost about 20% of its power. Its core was not damaged at all. If anyone could change its internal program settings, then the magic power device could be controlled by them. A golem construct with level 30 or above. This thing's combat power was simply too high. Furthermore, its armor level was extremely high. It probably took at least 1,000 damage from Soren's attacks. Crack. As the third floor's magic-powered armor was defeated, the door to the fourth floor opened. The energy supply system had been damaged, and hundreds of golems were left behind. Most of them were stone golems and steel golems, with only 2 intact diamond golems and 1 slightly damaged diamond golem. These golem puppets cannot be activated yet. Gloria walked up to one of the diamond golems and examined it, muttering, "The original creator has already injected the operation program inside. It must be completely modified before it can be activated, otherwise they will treat us as intruders. Golems all had their own internal settings. It was just like the golem puppets made by Gloria. Without her authorization, no one else could command them. In fact, if an order was given to protect a certain area, the golem puppets would automatically attack anyone who approached. Although they had a decent level of intelligence, they still weren't truly intelligent life forms. Most of the golems operated according to the original order, unless they encountered a high-level construct life form like the metallic girl in the bottomless abyss. Warning! Warning! A strange alarm sounded and lasted for about a minute before it stopped. Nothing unusual happened after that, but in the sky south of Motor City, the shadow of a tall tower suddenly appeared, looking like a mirage. The shadow only lasted for a short period of time. After a few minutes, it would be gone. Brother? Vivian seemed to be eager to try, as if she was very interested in the secrets inside the tower. She asked excitedly, "Do you want to continue? I can still cast another time stop. Should we continue our exploration? Metal, machinery, arcane energy. Everything here was out of place with what they saw in the material plane. It was as if humans living in the 21st century had suddenly stepped into a secret base in the interstellar era. Anyone could not help but be curious about everything here. I'll go up and take a look first." This battle was relatively easy. Soren made a gesture to the others, and then entered the 4th floor of the wizard tower. There were no enemies. Surprisingly, there were no enemies on the 4th floor of the wizard tower, and a lot of materials were stored, including the mysterious silver-white metal that Gloria had been trying to figure out. There were tons of them. There were 6 rooms on the 4th floor of the wizard tower. Each room had an extremely dangerous spell trigger trap. If the person who set the trap didn't enter, it would be triggered directly. The level of the spell trap was a bit scary. If it was another rogue who came in, they would probably die without knowing why. But this was nothing for Soren. Because he was the god of half-elves and rogues. If he couldn't even remove the spell trap, he could just find a place to kill himself. There's no danger. You can come up. Soren quickly removed a few spell traps and then looked down and said, "The 4th floor is a warehouse. It seems that there are no guards." There were 6 large rooms. It should also be the use of the space ability of the half-plane. The internal diameter was much larger than the diameter of the wizard tower. Wow! Vivian exclaimed when she came up, then approached one of the tables. After rummaging through the cabinets, she murmured, "So much dragon blood? But it seems to have expired." There were a bunch of bottles and jars. There were many labels on them, from black dragon, red dragon, blue dragon, silver dragon, and so on to hydra, hellhound, and deep-sea giant beasts. Unfortunately, because too much time had passed, both the potions and the blood had lost their effectiveness. "This is the frost giant potion, right?" Gloria picked up a bottle and looked at it, then opened the drawer next to her, and said excitedly, "The formula is here too." Huh. Why haven't I heard of some of the materials on it? Different times, there must be differences in the formula. Thousands of years had changed too much. There were a lot of things on the 4th floor. Although many of them were preserved by magic, time had turned them into scrap. More than half of the things here were damaged or expired. The only good thing was that all the metals here were well preserved. Is this astral sand? Gloria's white fingers picked up some strange silver-white powder. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and quickly rushed to the pile of silver-white metal. It was the core material of the floating ring. Most of the advanced magic power devices also had this kind of silver-white metal. Gloria compared the two materials with each other. As if she was not sure, she immediately turned to Fallen Witch and said, "Mother, can you please bring the alchemy device here? I need to analyze the structure of these two materials." The silver-white powder was not completely astral sand. This was because astral sand would emit a strange light, but the two looked very similar. It was possible that they had gone through some special refining process. Fallen Witch was very fast. She directly teleported back and then teleported back with an alchemy device. Gloria quickly put the silver-white metal powder on it, then picked up a small piece of silver-white metal ingot and analyzed it. With a faint magic aura, she got the answer in just a few minutes. She was very excited and said, "Although I don't understand how it is made. But I can be sure that this is really astral sand. It's just that the composition has changed slightly." Astral sand? Could it be that these materials used in the Arcane Empire came from the astral world? Great! Gloria's expression was quite excited. She murmured, "If we can figure out how these metals are made, we can make a huge floating ring. And I believe the Witch Council will be very willing to buy them at an extremely high price." Gloria needed a wizard tower. Fallen Witch also needed a wizard tower. Although they had never said it to Soren, they were just considerate of Soren's difficulties. The huge expenditure of Mordor City could not be reduced. The wizard tower often cost millions of kindler. Even the Witch Council could not afford it, so they could only make do with a laboratory. Now that they had this material, Gloria's first thought was to use it to exchange with the Witch Council for a huge amount of material to make a wizard tower. The floating city was the dream of all wizards. Before this dream was realized, the floating space tower was also something that they yearned for. There must be a way to make it. Gloria looked around excitedly. Soren quickly removed all the magic traps he found, lest his woman suddenly be trapped. But it was a pity. They found nothing at all. This floor was a warehouse, and most of it was materials. Could it be up there? Vivian stood at the top of the stairs and looked up curiously. However, she didn't go up rashly because she knew that it was dangerous. Upstairs? Gloria's eyes lit up and looked at Soren with expectation. This kind of thing must be decided by Soren. Soren pondered for a moment and said slowly, "I'll go up and have a look. You guys get ready for battle. We're close to the top of the wizard tower. I'm afraid we may encounter the Thaling who is responsible for guarding the 5th floor of the wizard tower." The height of this wizard tower was about 9 floors. The internal space must be more than that, but the higher the level, the higher the danger. Soren moved forward cautiously, and as expected, he found another spell trap. There were too many magic traps. In total, he had dispelled 20 to 30 advanced spell traps. The light on the 5th floor seemed to be very good. When Soren came to the 5th floor of the wizard tower, he could not help but be a little excited because he saw rows of bookshelves. Very, very many bookshelves. He did not know how many books there were on this floor, but what he saw in front of him was close to 10,000 books. Chapter 687. There were no enemies. Soren carefully observed his surroundings, using his god-level perception to the limit, but it seemed that there were no enemies on this floor. He quietly approached one of the bookshelves. When he reached out and touched one of the books, the power of time suddenly seemed to be triggered. The book in front of him actually weathered into powder. In an instant, dust was everywhere. The books in the entire bookshelf were all turned into dust. Even the books on the bookshelves next to it were mostly turned into powder. However, after a large number of books turned into dust, some of the books that did not change at all became very obvious. These were all magic books, or books that were enchanted with spells. Even wizards did not have enough energy to enchant all of the books. As a library, they would set up a large magic circle to prevent the books from being damaged and so on. However, time had erased all of these, and only the important books that were enchanted with spells were preserved. Many of the books were completely damaged, and the slightest touch would turn them into dust, but the books that were still intact had a faint magic aura. It seemed that there were no enemies. Soren breathed a sigh of relief in his heart and then greeted the people below. Soon, Gloria and the others all came up. At the same time. On the top floor of the wizard tower, 3 constructs made of strange metal were watching all of this. Thaling number 1. One of the Thaling whose lower body was made of air like an elemental spirit said in a deep voice, "The invaders have reached the 5th floor, why didn't they activate the arcane guard?" Thaling number 1 looked very ordinary, but it was this ordinariness that made it extraordinary. In front of it was a virtual image of Soren and the others who entered the 5th floor. After a moment of contemplation, it slowly said, "The 5th floor is the Master's library, and they are all very important things. If there is a battle, it is very likely that this place will be destroyed. I believe that the Master doesn't want to destroy these precious books. So much time has passed, and if the Master is still alive, he would have returned long ago. Let's just wait and see." Hearing Thaling number 1's words, the Thaling next to it could not help but be silent. As a kind of high-level construct, although they had great power, they were also strictly limited. They faithfully carried out their master's orders, but after so long, even they would feel tired. Rune lifeforms weren't immortal. Some of them had already disappeared in the river of time. Thousands of years were enough to wear down even their souls. Therefore, Thaling number 1 might have thought of other ways to carry out its master's orders. It had already changed its body 3 times. As the oldest Thaling in the Wizard Tower, more than 3,000 years had weakened it. This weakening was not in terms of strength, but in terms of soul. Since rune lifeforms were also called lifeforms, there would naturally be a time when they would die. They weren't liches. They were just artificial lifeforms, and their souls couldn't be compared to humans. The weakness caused by the liches changing their bodies could be recovered through other methods, but they couldn't do that at all. As a kind of high-level construct lifeform, Thaling's body could last for hundreds of thousands of years. However, it had been too long since the Arcane Empire. Changing their bodies again and again had brought them closer to death. If Soren didn't come, perhaps all the Thaling here would have died in less than 100 years. No. Perhaps there was another one, and that was Thaling number 13 in the war chess plane. It had a special divinity, and perhaps it was the only Thaling that was close to immortality. 1,000 years, 2,000 years, even they would not be able to escape death in the end. Even planes would die at some point, let alone construct life forms like them. Perhaps in the entire multiverse, only the gods were truly immortal. The 5th floor of the Wizard Tower. The collection here was extremely large, but less than 1,000th of the books were preserved. However, without exception, they were all very precious. After flipping through a few books, Gloria immediately said, "These books need to be moved back." The Wizard Tower hadn't been taken down yet. It was obviously not wise to leave these books here. It was better to move them all back first. Vivian was obviously not very interested in these books. As a warlock favored by the gods, she mostly relied on her innate talent to cast spells. So, after reading the books out of boredom, she rolled her big eyes and had some ideas about the higher levels. "Brother." The little girl ran to Soren's side and said in a clear voice, "Why don't we continue to go up? It seems like there are no guards on these 2 levels. Maybe it's the same above." Soren's expression was a little hesitant. However, he didn't hesitate for too long. He planned to go up and check the situation. There were no enemies on the 2 levels, so there might be no guards on the higher levels. Soren carefully approached the 6th floor of the Wizard Tower. However, before he could see everything clearly, a strange light suddenly appeared. It was so fast that it was impossible to dodge. It had exceeded the speed of movement, and it directly slashed toward Soren's body. It was a critical moment. Soren's dodging ability, which was close to the top of the material plane, finally came into play. Relying on his strong intuitive dodging ability, he turned his body 360 degrees in advance and avoided the vital parts of his body in an extremely thrilling way. Pada. Half of his hand fell to the ground. Soren's figure quickly stepped back. When he raised his hand, only half of his left hand was left. There was no blood on the wound because the flesh and blood had been burned. The cut was unusually neat, and it happened in a flash. When he retreated to the 5th floor, he felt a sharp pain from his hand. "Brother!" Vivian exclaimed and quickly rushed over. She was worried and asked, "Are you okay?" Soren's face was slightly pale. He shook his head and said, "I'm fine. This injury is nothing." Broken limb regeneration. Restoration. Soren gritted his teeth and cut off a part of his hand. Then the light of divinity appeared, and the broken limb regeneration combined with restoration healed his injury. What the hell is this? Is it a laser? Soren was not sure what it was because the light came out in a flash. It seemed to be a bit similar to a laser. It had a terrible destructive force on a physical level, but he was not sure if the energy shield was effective. Are you okay? The situation here alerted Gloria, who was organizing the books. She quickly rushed over and asked worriedly, "Are you hurt badly?" Soren shook his head and raised his hand to show them. He then said, "Be careful. Don't go near the front. Looks like there's a powerful trap up there." Is it really a laser? Soren was not sure yet, but he felt that it should be something similar. If it was really a laser, then there must be a trigger device. As long as he destroyed it, he could enter the 6th floor. The level of civilization during the Arcane Empire was probably not much lower than the Interstellar era. They had been exploring the astral plane and the multiverse for a long time. The appearance of something like this was still within the range of Soren's tolerance. He could still get rid of this thing after he figured out the situation. Why don't we stop here for today? Gloria checked Soren's injuries, then looked at the half of his hand that was cut off on the ground. She said with a serious expression, "I'm researching a level 9 spell called Spirit World Travel. Maybe we can wait until I'm done and go through here in spirit form." Soren nodded when he heard that. This thing was a bit dangerous. Cutting off the hand was not a big deal, but if the head was cut off as well, then he would be dead for sure. This kind of trap could not even protect against spirits. It was safer to wait until Gloria mastered the spell. But before leaving, Soren wanted to continue testing, so he quickly took out 2 pieces of metal and threw them toward the stairs in front of him. One left and one right. In an instant, a strange light appeared in front of him again, but this time there were 2 of them. They were so fast that they could not be seen. Then, the 2 pieces of metal were cut into 4 pieces. Looks like my body can't take it anymore. A thought suddenly popped up in Soren's mind, and a small black stone appeared in his palm. This was the demon stone. It was an elemental material that appeared in the abyss near the edge of the plane. The size of a small fingernail could weigh more than a few kilograms. Soren carefully threw it out. In an instant, the strange light appeared again, and then there was the sound of something falling to the ground. Magician's hand. Soren cast a spell and took the demon stone back. It was not cut in half, but there was a very shallow mark on the surface. It seemed that the light was not enough to cut it. 1 object was 1 light, and 2 objects were 2 light. Soren seemed to have understood something. It was not difficult to pass through it. Soren actually had another way, which was to use the divine shield to rush through. This thing was similar to the mana crystal pulse cannon. Anyway, it was a highly condensed energy attack, which could be understood as the lowest level of mana pulse attack. If he opened the divine shield, he could still rush through it, but the consumption of divine power points might be a lot. When the God Slayer dealt with the Queen of Spiders, a mana pulse cannon almost broke the Queen of Spiders' divine shield. Although the Queen of Spiders was very powerful, the consumption of divine power points must be very high. Soren thought about it and decided to take it slow. The Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer, and divine power points were more precious than slaughter EXP. There was no need to use them like this. The group quickly left the Wizard Tower. Gloria and the Fallen Witch needed to digest today's gains, and Vivian also needed to further integrate the power of the divine spark. The little girl's priesthood was still not settled at all. Soren had no clue now. He did not know what kind of priesthood Vivian was suitable for and what kind of help he could provide. Fear was temporarily impossible. Chapter 688. Clergy, Divinity, and Godhood. These were the foundation of the Trinity at the divine level. If these 3 points could not be met, it was impossible to become a true God. The group soon returned to Mordor City. If possible, Soren still wanted to help Vivian become a god. In this way, she would be on the same level as the Dread Lord. Even if there was a gap in strength between gods, there would not be a terrible suppression of the gods. However, the clergy suitable for Vivian was a problem that gave Soren a headache. Even if he was willing to give his clergy to Vivian, the little girl would not be able to absorb it at all. The clergy must meet their own conditions. It was just like how Soren was a half-elf and a rogue, which was why he could easily fuse these two clergies. Although the tracking clergy had no direct connection, it was also very compatible with him, so Soren could easily absorb and transform it. If Soren was suddenly given a matriarchal clergy, he would not want it anymore. There were still many clergies for general purposes. However, there were also many clergies that were only suitable for men and women. If he didn't want to become like the Elven Lord, it was better not to integrate clergies that were not suitable for him. A day passed in the blink of an eye. With the arrival of the new year, the atmosphere in Mordor City became cheerful. Even the drows, who had always been serious and rigid, began to prepare for the new year. Other people were naturally very eager. During this time, some outsiders came to Mordor City. Many of them were bards. Some of them were believers who served the goddess of joy, and some were hedonists who worshipped the goddess of cat and dance. Festivals were when they were very active. The war on the continent made the joy less and less. Even when the new year was coming, there were many places where there was no joy of the festival. So in order to complete part of the tasks of the temple, these guys turned their attention to the more peaceful and prosperous areas. If they couldn't even fill their stomachs, then there was no joy to speak of. The beliefs of these two goddesses were based on the condition of being well-fed and well-fed. Without material conditions as a foundation, the teachings of these two goddesses were simply a joke. During this time, the street performances in Mordor City had changed a lot. Novel shows appeared one after another, greatly enriching the lives of the residents of Mordor City. Of course, the rich residents of Mordor were not stingy. For those satisfactory performances, they did not mind throwing a few more silver dirhams. They still had to take a break for the new year. It wasn't a long time. Soren only planned to give them 7 days of leave. The military only had 3 days, and the garrison only had 3 days off. Half a month before the new year, these bards came. The performances in the taverns never stopped. There were also new magic tricks on the streets, or cheerful songs and dances. Joy may be good, but pleasure is better not. Both goddesses were famous hedonists, and their believers were naturally the same. The middle and high levels of Mordor were still restricted by Soren. He would never allow internal corruption to have hedonistic thoughts. Aristocratic ball? Forget it. There were no nobles in Mordor City, so naturally, there was no need for aristocratic masquerades. This thing was used by the two goddesses to infiltrate the ruling class. Happiness was something that only people who didn't have to worry about food and clothing would pursue more. So during this time, the ordinary people of Mordor City had a lot of fun, but the management of the city was still shrouded in a tense atmosphere. Soren didn't want to have a bad relationship with the two goddesses, but he also didn't want to see them infiltrate his power. He still had to pay attention to this aspect because there were more handsome men and beautiful women among the believers of the two goddesses. Bards also relied on their faces and charm to make a living. Soren still remembered that in an aristocratic masquerade ball he once participated in, even the priest of the goddess of joy came in person. As for what it was, as long as one was a man, they would definitely know. Soren thought that time would pass quietly to the new year. But he still thought too much. Just a week before the new year, a terrible disaster came to Mordor City. That day, the wind was gentle and the sun was bright. It should be a rare good weather during this time. Many people came out to bask in the sun and wash clothes. It looked no different from usual. But when it was close to noon, the sky suddenly darkened. It was very dark. There was a sense of oppression like dark clouds, and the wind was raging. However, there was no rainstorm, but there was no sunlight. Is a storm coming? Soren seemed to have sensed it. His figure appeared outside the door, frowning and looking at the sky. As the god who sheltered Mordor City, he had a special sense of everything here. Some drastic changes, including the weather, would be noticed by him. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. But just when Soren thought it was just a more serious storm coming, suddenly there was a scream full of fear from the port area. The response of the guards was extremely fast. Almost before the harassment spread, a team of troops rushed to the port of Mordor City. But when they saw everything in front of them, the general of the guards couldn't help but swallow deeply. This man with the strength of a high-grade profession instantly broke out in a cold sweat. Ahead, a huge whirlpool first appeared on the sea, and then the sea began to surge wildly. It was directly lifted into the air by a powerful suction. Not far away, there was a medium-sized fishing boat. In just a moment, the fishing boat was pulled in by a huge suction force. In the process of high-speed rotation, the entire fishing boat became fragmented, and the living people on it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Waterspout. A terrifyingly huge tornado was taking shape. It was still some distance away from the port of Mordor City, but it had already brought a terrible disaster. The nearby fishing boats couldn't escape from the wind at all, and they were pulled in and shattered in an instant. Even a warship of Mordor City couldn't resist this terrible power. It also rose into the air and shattered under the amazing tearing force inside the tornado. The giant tornado was gradually approaching. The terrible wind almost made people unable to stand still. Its route was just in the direction of Mordor City. If it swept through Mordor City, there would be only ruins left. Bardolph was a brave warrior. Although Bardolph was not like some people in Mordor City who could take off their shirts in the tavern to show others their plentiful achievements, as a warrior who had made contributions in the naval battle of Raging Sand Island, it was not an exaggeration to say that Bardolph had been through hundreds of battles. But now, this northern man who dared to rush into more than 10 enemies alone was a little weak at the moment. Because everything that appeared in front of him was not something he could resist at all. This was a natural disaster. He was not afraid of enemies stronger than himself. He even killed opponents stronger than himself several times. But now, everything he faced had made him feel deeply powerless. The terrible tornado was gradually approaching. When it passed over Port Mordor, it could destroy everything here in an instant. This was the power of nature. It was not something that mortals could resist at all. Perhaps only the gods could resist this terrible natural disaster. Gods. A thought flashed through Bardolph's mind. The next moment, he saw a sacred light rising in the central square of Mordor City. This light went straight into the sky. Then a huge figure appeared in the sky. His whole body seemed to be made of golden light. In an instant, he appeared over the port of Mordor City. The situation was so critical. So much so that Soren had no time to think about how this terrible tornado appeared. He must not let the huge tornado pass over Mordor City. Otherwise, he would have to rebuild everything on the ruins. God form. In the central square. The high priest was personally presiding over a super-large prayer ceremony. Almost all the believers were temporarily gathered by the army. Bursts of prayers echoed over Mordor City. The power of faith shrouded in the temple was frantically extracted by Soren, and then poured into his temporary body like a tide. A body completely composed of energy and divine power. Although it was still not a complete divine form, this was already Soren's strongest form. Only in a place with his temple, Soren could temporarily enter this form, and it would consume a lot of divine power. The huge tornado was getting closer and closer. The wooden buildings near the port were easily torn apart. Not only were there all kinds of debris flying in the sky, but also people who could not escape in time. Soren had no energy to save these people at the moment. The enemy he needed to face was not something that could be killed by force. In the face of this terrible disaster formed by nature, he could only rely on the power of the gods to fight against it. His divine power was being consumed crazily. Even the power of the temple could not maintain Soren's divine form at this moment. In the face of this terrible supergiant tornado, Soren could only gather all his power to cast a divine spell. Miracle. Legendary divine spell, change reality. Divine ability, the dazzling golden light shrouded the world. All the power of faith in the city of Moder was frantically extracted. In an instant, the world changed color, and even the surrounding space seemed to be blocked. A huge amount of divine power and the faith of the people converged, and the prayers of the believers echoed between heaven and earth. Soren was the carrier of this power. He transformed all his divine power and the prayers of the people into real power. He changed and distorted the reality in front of him in the form of a god. In the surging torrent of power, he forcibly strangled the supergiant tornado in front of him. Everything returned to calm. If it weren't for the building debris falling from the sky and the bloody bodies, everyone would think that the terrible disaster that had just appeared was just an illusion. There was a burst of cheers. The people who survived couldn't help but cry with joy. They were glad that they had safely survived this terrible disaster. Soren's expression was unprecedentedly tired. He was almost able to stand with the help of Gloria. This terrible tornado appeared so strangely. As if he had sensed it, Soren suddenly looked in the direction of the Amazon jungle. Fly. Soren seemed to be a little exhausted at the moment. He said to Gloria next to him, and soon the two of them rose into the air. The height was gradually climbing. Everything under their feet became smaller and smaller. Gloria's expression was a little confused at first, but soon she was shocked. Tornado. In their sight, they could also see a huge tornado, but it was far away from Moder City. It raged very far away from the island, tearing everything into pieces. Sure enough. Soren sighed and said slowly, "Let's go down. I understand the reason. The Storm Lord. This ancient god, he finally failed to resist the energy storm. It seemed that now he had also fallen into the mortal world." Chapter 689. Moder City. There were several documents on the desk in front of Soren. At the moment, he seemed to be in a heavy mood. After picking up a document and looking at it, he resealed it and archived it in his database. What was recorded was some special information, many of which were directly related to the gods. For example, the information on the left of Soren recorded a place that had been barren for hundreds of years and was called Death Valley by the locals. Suddenly, flowers bloomed overnight and the lush vegetation became a living paradise. Until now, it was called a miracle of nature by the droll. Without a doubt. This must be the work of the gods. The second document recorded a forest near the Frost Kingdom. It was a relatively large primeval forest. All of a sudden, it withered overnight and became a land of death. It even infected everything around it like a plague. This must also be the work of the gods. It should be the work of the Lady of Pestilence and Poison. These events all had one thing in common. That was, when the gods fell to the mortal world, they were accompanied by some special events. These events completely violated the laws of nature. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were some kind of miracles. The sudden appearance of a huge tornado was the same kind of event. The great divine power of the Storm Lord fell to the mortal world because of the Avatar crisis. The terrible divine power he possessed was no longer under his control. It was mentioned before that if the gods fell to the mortal world, they could not retain the divine power accumulated over a long period of time, as well as the power of faith from within the divine kingdom. When the gods fell to the mortal world, they were in the form of a saint, and all the divine power they possessed would be emptied at once. The emptied divine power would not disappear for no reason. These divine power values would produce a variety of terrible effects according to the characteristics, power, and priesthood of the gods. For example, the Death Valley suddenly became a vibrant paradise, and a huge forest suddenly withered overnight. Or like Sauron's Mordor city, there was a huge tornado that inexplicably appeared, bringing serious damage to Mordor city. Of course. Yesterday's disaster was probably more than that. That was why Soren was sitting here meditating. First, we need to calculate the power of the Storm Lord. As one of the oldest primitive gods, the Lord of Storms was a great divine power from the moment he was born. He was one of the few main gods of the divine system who was qualified to be a greater divine power. He was also the master of many gods of the evil camp. Soren's current divinity was 30 points, which meant that he could store 600 divinity points. If he needed 100 divinity points to become an intermediate divinity, then he could store around 2,000 divinity points. Great divine powers were not very clear at the moment. But according to a rough estimate, it should be at least 300 divinity points, which meant that the Lord of Storms had more than 6,000 divinity points. In their own god kingdom, the gods basically maintained a state of full divine power. For an ancient god like the Lord of Storms, the believers and power of faith in his holy kingdom were definitely abundant, but he still lacked a chance to trigger a qualitative change. Based on this calculation, when the Lord of Storms fell to the mortal world, he had at least 6,000 divine power points. The next thing was very crucial. More than 6,000 divine power points, when the Lord of Storms fell to the mortal world, were all stripped away because of the Avatar crisis. Such a huge amount of divine power directly distorted the environment of the material plane. Not only did it form a terrible giant tornado in the city of Moder, but it even caused quite terrible disasters in other places. Because this was an overseas area, the fall of the Lord of Storms should not have much impact on the mainland. In theory, the place that should be most affected should be the Amazon jungle, and then the outer islands near the Amazon jungle would be affected. 6,000 divine power points. With such a huge power, Soren could not imagine how much damage it would cause. The Lord of Storms was not a god of the good camp. His power was full of aggression, destruction, and destruction. At this time, when he fell to the mortal world, the dissipation of divine power would have a huge impact on the divine power of the entire overseas area. He definitely did not come down voluntarily. The gods who came down voluntarily could at least leave their divine power inside the god's kingdom, so it would not have a terrible impact on the material plane. Many gods came down voluntarily. Although they still could not bring down any divine power points, at least they could leave their divine power inside the god's kingdom to prevent the further impact of the stripped divine power on the material plane. This sudden disaster might have changed some of the patterns in the overseas area. The dock area had become a mess. The loss of the city of Moder was still relatively serious. They lost a warship and nearly 100 soldiers on it, and all 5 fishing boats sank. About 1/5 of the dock was destroyed, and it would take some time to repair. At present, the number of missing people had reached at least 1,000, and more than 300 people were confirmed dead. The main reason was that the port of Moder was too crowded, and the giant tornado appeared too quickly. Some people did not even have time to escape before they disappeared. The only good thing was that the number of believers praying in the temple had increased a lot. Even merchants from other places in the city of Moder had donated a lot of kindler. Soren's miracle obviously had a more far-reaching impact. In the face of such a terrible disaster, a God who blessed them would naturally make the believers more devout. The bad thing was that the divine power points were all used up. Fortunately, the recovery speed was not slow. The divine power points increased by about 1 or 2 points every day. It should be related to the expansion of believers and the piety of their faith. It was estimated that this disaster could bring some devout fanatics to Soren. Quack, quack, quack. A strange sound echoed near the port of Moder. There were also bodies floating on the sea. The army was salvaging these bodies for burial. Suddenly, a strange bird appeared in their line of sight. Its appearance was 60% similar to a crow, but its appearance was scarier. It had pitch-black feathers, a sharp beak, blood-red eyes, and dark green claws. Its body wasn't very big, but what was more frightening was that its body was surrounded by a strange black gas, which even made the space around it somewhat blurry. What the hell is this? The officer near the port was shocked. The strange bird stopped on a mast. The sailors near it seemed to be a little timid, and no one dared to go up and drive it away. The officer bravely approached, and just as he was about to drive the strange bird away, he was glanced at by the other party's scarlet eyes, and his legs were a little weak. Hurry up. His voice trembled a little, and he hurriedly said, "Report to the higher-ups immediately, this bird is strange." Soren was not the first to arrive. Gloria arrived one step ahead of him. After seeing the strange bird in front of her, her heart couldn't help but thump. Then she searched for the memory of it in her mind. After thinking of something, her expression couldn't help but become slightly nervous. Bird of Death? Soren's figure appeared in the shadow. When he saw the strange bird that looked like a crow in front of him, his expression couldn't help but be quite dignified. He murmured, "Why is this thing here? Don't they rarely come to the material plane?" Bird of Death. As the name suggested, it was a bird with a special perception of death. They were also the eyes and ears of the Grim Reaper. This strange bird's challenge level was not high. The most troublesome ability was only death gaze. Most of the time, it lived in the spiritual realm and the underworld. It was basically difficult to see its traces in other planes. Bird of Death had a special connection with the Grim Reaper. Many mortals mistakenly thought that they were crows, but in fact, they were a special life created by the Grim Reaper. Bird of Death could see spirits, ghosts, and the undead. They liked to chase the traces of death. In the spiritual realm, if a lot of people died, the Bird of Death would usually appear quickly. Then, the servants of the Grim Reaper would also come. The Grim Reaper naturally also had a kingdom that belonged to them. There were many souls that served them. Most of the souls were operated through the river Styx. Only souls that were strong enough could alarm the servants of the Grim Reaper. Under normal circumstances, wherever the Bird of Death appeared, it was possible to see the servants of the Grim Reaper. Divine perception. Soren's sight crossed the space, and everything in front of him became gray. Not only did the shadow plane enter his vision, but also everything in the spiritual realm entered his perception range. There was no Grim Reaper. What he saw was just a twisted monster with a pair of scarlet eyes that was shrouded in a black shadow. It didn't look like a bird anymore. This was the true face of the Bird of Death. It didn't appear. Soren's appearance seemed to alarm the Bird of Death in front of him. After taking a look at Soren, the Bird of Death, which was unscrupulous at first, suddenly showed a very human-like expression of horror, and then made a crow's caw and flew in the direction of the sea. Soren scared it. The Bird of Death seemed to have seen through his identity as a god spirit, and then it ran away in fear. Is the underworld also affected by the Avatar crisis? All this seemed like a small episode, but Soren must have thought of more than this. The appearance of the Bird of Death was definitely not good news, because seeing this thing was said to bring bad luck. However, Soren had the blessing of the goddess of misfortune, so it shouldn't have any effect, right? Chapter 690. A Quiet Night. The port of Mordor City seemed very calm. Except for the guards patrolling from time to time, there was only a little noise coming from the tavern. New Year was coming. Even if such a terrible disaster happened yesterday, there were still many people in the tavern today. In the words of these people, such a terrible thing had happened so suddenly that they were almost scared to death. At such a time, they definitely needed a drink to calm their nerves. Raisin was dragged to the tavern by his companions. At that time, the huge tornado suddenly appeared, and he was very close to his companions. The terrible wind almost swept them away. If it weren't for the fact that they were holding on to a wooden stake, and Soren ended the tornado at that time, they would have died long ago. Raisin was not a good drinker. So after a few drinks, he sneaked out quietly. Suddenly, he felt a little urgent to pee, so he avoided the guards and walked towards the edge of the dock. Mordor City did not allow people to urinate and defecate anywhere. If they were caught, they would be whipped. However, sailors like them naturally had their ways. They ran to the dock and peed directly into the sea. Even if the guards saw it, they couldn't do anything because it was impossible to catch them red-handed. Everything should be fine. But when Raisin finished peeing and was about to go back, he suddenly felt a cold wind blowing, and his whole body couldn't help but shiver. Forget it. Inexplicably, he felt a little panic in his heart. He even felt that something was looking at him from behind. Maybe to embolden himself, he couldn't help but raise his body slightly and said to himself, "I'll just go back and drink." At this moment, suddenly, a cold palm touched his back, and then there was a sad voice, "Is there any wine? I want to have a drink." What the hell? It turned out that there was someone behind him. Which bastard came to scare him? Although Raisin was not a powerful professional, he had at least practiced a little. After hearing someone talking behind him, he suddenly felt a lot bolder. He turned around and said, "You bastard. Do you want to scare me to death? You. What the hell? There's a ghost." Plop. Laxon lost his balance and fell directly into the sea from the dock. The cold sea water immediately made him sober, but he was still very scared. His teeth were chattering as he shouted, "Help! There was a ghost. It was really an undead. Someone come quickly. This place is haunted." In Rexon's line of sight, there was a middle-aged man with an incomparably pale complexion. His figure was floating in the air, and his lower body was a blurry mass of gas. Only his upper body looked like a human. His expression seemed to be a little dazed, as if he had been frightened. But at this moment, there was a sudden sound of footsteps, and the patrol team members rushed over. The appearance of the torch in front of them seemed to have startled the ghost in front of them. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. Lake Sun was quickly scooped up. Because of the smell of alcohol, at first, the patrol thought that he was a drunkard who was talking nonsense. So, after being taught a lesson, the patrol let him go. Things didn't seem to have any problems. But then something went wrong. Because in the middle of the next night, the patrol team members suddenly heard someone shouting that there was a ghost. This time, the patrol team finally took it seriously. They quickly reported the matter to the temple and the city hall, and then the priests immediately came to check. Unfortunately, after spending a little effort, the priests still found nothing. The third day, the higher-ups began to send people to act in advance. Several clever rogues lurked nearby. They waited until midnight, and they finally saw some vague pale ghosts. And there was more than one. It was really a ghost. Since the establishment of Mordor City, it had never been haunted. It was not unusual for people to die. Mordor City had fought a lot of wars. Even if thousands of people died on some battlefields, it was still a battlefield. But why did it suddenly become haunted this time? No matter how many strange things happened, life still had to go on. Maybe it was because the Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer, and more strange things were happening. Even the nerves of ordinary people had become much more relaxed, and their ability to accept things had also strengthened a lot. Port Mordor was haunted. It was not surprising that the news quickly spread throughout the docks. But it was not a problem for it to spread throughout the docks. Everyone still did what they should do. They couldn't just do nothing because it was haunted, right? They could only make do with it for now. The arrival of the new year was still unstoppable. 3 days before the new year, the city of Mordor had its second snow of the day. The haunting seemed to have been solved by the temple. At least no one had encountered ghosts again. There would be a grand ceremony held by the temple for the new year. There would be a large-scale celebration at that time. Now the whole city of Mordor was busy, and the civilians were also looking forward to that day. However, on the day of the new year, Soren received a very important news. The goddess of magic had finally appeared. The goddess had been in the mortal world for some time. She was called the Mysterious Lady by the world. If she really wanted to hide, it would be very difficult to find her. Counting with his fingers, the goddess had been in the mortal world for almost 3 months. According to the normal progress and without any accidents, the goddess of magic should have recovered a part of her divine power. After all, her priesthood was too powerful. With the help of the magic net, her recovery speed would definitely be faster than other gods. The timing of the goddess' appearance was very special. It happened to be the day before the new year. So after receiving the news, Soren didn't care about the new year. He took the things he had prepared and immediately tracked the goddess. The goddess of magic appeared. She actually appeared in the east of the material plane. No wonder so many people didn't have any news about her. She actually went to the Eastern Kingdom with a large number of magic chaotic areas and dead magic areas. This was probably the case of the most dangerous place is the safest place. The goddess of magic, who walked in the Eastern Kingdom, was probably the most affected, but it was because of this that no one could guess where she went. It wasn't until the day before yesterday, when a special phenomenon close to the level of a miracle suddenly appeared, that the traces of the goddess of magic were discovered. The goddess of magic went to the Eastern Kingdom. It seemed that she should be back now. No one knew where she was yet, but as long as there was a trace, there would always be a way to find her. Chapter 691. The goddess of magic was one of the biggest changes in the Avatar crisis. It could be said that it was because of her fall that the Avatar crisis caused such terrible damage. The impact of the collapse of the magic net was too long ago, and it affected the whole multiverse until the end of the Avatar crisis. So, from Soren's point of view, the sudden appearance of the goddess of magic this time, no matter what, he had to pay attention to it. Whether it could change the future or not, at least he needed to judge where the future would lead from this matter. In the near future, the death of tens of millions of people was related to the goddess of magic. At the critical moment when the plane barrier was broken and the demon army and the devil army came to the material plane, the goddess of magic suddenly fell. The collapse of the magic net caused all the spellcasters to become weak in an instant. Not only were the wizards sent to hell, but even the priests were in an awkward situation because the faith network above the 9th layer of the magic net collapsed. The gods were temporarily unable to access the divine spells bestowed by the higher levels of the magic net and fell into an awkward situation where they could only fight hand to hand. In this case, only the melee professions could stand on the front line against the demons and devils. At that time, there were many tragic heroes. The names of many warriors were spread by the world, but in the end, they still couldn't change the overall situation. It was impossible to stop the demon army by relying on the melee professions. Without the help of spellcasters, they couldn't even close the abyss portals. Many legendary-level warriors had killed thousands of demons, only to be exhausted to death by the demons surging out of the portals. Although the material plane was weak, most of the cities had at least one legendary profession in charge. Especially the Northern Witch Tower and the Southern Wizard City, there were many legendary spellcasters in these two places. If the magic net hadn't suddenly collapsed, the material plane wouldn't have been riddled with holes all of a sudden. The whistling wind was accompanied by sand and dust. Soren sensed everything around him. It seems that the goddess of magic really showed up here. This was a place near the eastern desert, and the source of the information was here. Just one day before the new year, a quite amazing magic storm suddenly formed here. There were only 2 people in the entire material plane who could do this. One was the Lady of Night who created the shadow magic net, and the other was the goddess of magic. Even though 3 days had passed, there was still a lot of elemental energy left in this place. This place had been permanently changed into an active magic area. Since there was a dead magic area, there were naturally some places that were very suitable for casting spells. The goddess of magic should have appeared here, but where will she go next? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. He could sense that there were other people nearby, but he didn't care. The appearance of the goddess of magic had attracted too many people's attention. Everyone was looking for traces of the goddess of magic. At this moment, Soren looked like a high-grade magus. Soren didn't dress up like a rogue at all. Now, he looked like a purebred wizard, and there were many people like him nearby. For these wizards who hadn't stepped into the realm of legends, as long as they pleased the goddess of magic a little, they might be directly promoted to the realm of legendary wizards. There was no other way. The goddess of magic was just that awesome. If she wanted to cultivate a legendary wizard, she could do so in a matter of minutes. I can only rely on the clergy of tracking. The goddess of magic was also known as the Mysterious Lady. Soren walked around and found nothing at all. In the end, he could only rely on the clergy of tracking to find her. There were traces left by her here, and the clergy of tracking could provide clues for Soren. Found it. Soren stood still for a long time. When he suddenly opened his eyes, a faint divine light appeared in his pupils, and then disappeared completely. He quickly left in one direction and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The people nearby didn't find it strange. Since the goddess of magic appeared here, spellcasters would appear here every day, then stay for a while and leave in one direction according to prophecy or their own intuition, trying to find the goddess of magic who had fallen to the mortal world. But it was a little strange that for some reason, every spellcaster who used prophecy here seemed to be able to find something. As for whether it was true or not, no one knew. He walked for 3 days. Strictly speaking, Soren really didn't have any clues about the goddess of magic's whereabouts. It was the power of the clergy of tracking that guided him. He himself wasn't sure if the clergy of tracking could find the goddess of magic, but at this point, he could only believe that the power of the clergy wouldn't let him down. It was difficult for others to find such a powerful deity if she wanted to cover up her tracks. Night fell. After walking in the northwest direction for 3 days, Soren's sensing by relying on the clergy of tracking was suddenly cut off. There were only 2 reasons for this situation. One was that he had completely lost track of the goddess of magic, and even the clergy of tracking couldn't find her traces. The second was that the goddess of magic was nearby. The other party's divinity and clergy blocked the effect of Soren because the mysterious lady had a lot of special fields. The clergy of tracking was very likely to fail if he was very close to her. Soren naturally still hoped that the goddess of magic was nearby. So he stopped and carefully searched nearby. This was a forest near the northwest direction, not far from the misty forest. Soren vaguely remembered that he had heard of this place before. Generally speaking. Soren remembered that there were treasures in places because of the profession of a rogue. Who is it? Suddenly, a vigilant voice sounded. Soren found that he had triggered an alert spell at this time. The opponent's spellcasting ability was obviously much higher than his. I mean no harm. Soren quickly stood up from the shadows because he had seen the missile storm condensed in the opponent's palm. He explained, I'm the wizard from the south, Sauron. I just happened to pass by here. May I know who you are? Hearing Soren's words, the wizard in front of him obviously relaxed a little, but he didn't completely eliminate his hostility. Instead, he slowly said, I'm Ildes from the City of Wizards. What are you doing here? Ildes? When Soren heard this name, he couldn't help but tremble. Because he actually met a future famous person, and one of the most powerful wizards in the material plane in the future. Of course. This future most powerful wizard didn't have many brilliant achievements. In Soren's memory, although he had heard of his strength, he didn't hear of any powerful enemies he had killed. However, this guy was quite lucky. He had lived safely until the end of the Avatar crisis, and the reason why he could become the most powerful wizard in the material plane was very simple. That was, he slept with the goddess of magic. It should be mentioned before that if a wizard was lucky enough to get the favor of the goddess of magic, or had close contact with her incarnation, then the wizard could get a special gift. Under normal circumstances, this lucky guy would permanently add an extra legendary spell slot, or even more lucky, all spell slots would be added by 1. These were all permanent. And these spell slots wouldn't be affected by one's own strength. Even if a level 1 wizard got the favor of the goddess of magic, he could also use these spell slots after a close contact. Of course, the premise was that he could remember a legendary spell. It seemed that this generation's goddess of magic was the only lucky guy who got the favor of the goddess of magic, but the previous goddess of magic had a lot of wizards who got the favor. Even the daughter of the previous goddess of magic could bestow extra spell slots. A certain lady who had once ruled Silvermoon City was quite sought after by the people, because obtaining her youthful knight could give you an extra spell slot. To be honest, if there were really children of the plane in this world, then Ildes in front of him should be one of them. Chapter 692. Ildes. Since he could meet the most powerful wizard in the future here, Soren was sure that the goddess of magic should be nearby. Ildes had been with the goddess of magic for a long time, and it could even be said that before the fall of the goddess of magic, this guy had been very close to the goddess of magic. Although Soren was not quite sure how far the timeline had come, judging from the current situation, Ildes in front of him was very likely to have seen the goddess of magic. Even if he had not seen the goddess of magic, Soren believed that as long as he followed him, he could find the goddess of magic. Hey! Ildes's expression seemed a little impatient because Soren did not answer his question. As a wizard, he was not the kind of guy with a good temper. So, he said impatiently, "If there is nothing else, please leave here immediately." His tone became impolite. Ildes's reputation in the future was neither good nor bad. It could only be said that he was the kind of guy who would protect himself. At least during the most serious period of the Avatar crisis, many strong men fought for each other's beliefs. This guy in front of him was hiding somewhere quietly waiting for the end of the Avatar crisis. He had great power but did not do anything for the mortals. At that time, among the good and righteous adventurers, Ildes's reputation was actually very bad. Many people thought that he was a selfish coward who inherited part of the power of the goddess of magic after the fall of the goddess of magic, but he only knew how to hide in the corner and do nothing. The paladin had asked him for help and invitation, but in the end, he did not respond. During the Avatar crisis, the number of spellcasters in the material plane was quite limited. Except for one or two special existences, the most powerful ones were Ildes in front of him and Arendelle's Princess Royal. The two had never fought, so there was no way to calculate who was stronger. Soren could not leave. He still had to find the goddess of magic who fell to the mortal world through Ildes. In any case, he felt that he should meet the goddess. Soren felt that some of his appropriate reminders might be able to change the fate of the future. Actually, Soren's mind raced as he tried to recall all the information he could find about Ildes. It was not easy to eliminate a stranger in such a short amount of time. However, Soren was not completely out of ideas because he remembered that Ildes had yet to find that item. If Soren remembered correctly, Ildes cared a lot about that thing. He even spent a long time looking for clues related to it. After a short pause, Soren pretended to be hesitant. After a while, he said, "Actually, at first, I was going to look for the goddess of magic. But after discovering that so many people are looking for her, I'm ready to give up. However, recently, I accidentally discovered the secret of a treasure. This treasure is related to the legendary Archmage staff. From what I can see, Your Excellency seems to be a very powerful spellcaster. I can't enter this treasure trove by myself. Perhaps we can work together to explore it. Of course, if you're not interested, I'll leave now." At first, Ildes didn't seem to care too much. He was still very wary of this stranger who suddenly appeared. However, when Soren mentioned the legendary Archmage staff, Ildes's expression suddenly became quite serious. He even cast a lie detection spell at an astonishing speed. In a very short time, he was sure that Soren was not lying. He really knew the secret related to the Archmage staff. Then, in an instant, Ildes's expression became a lot more enthusiastic. He pointed at the bonfire next to him and said with a slightly fake smile, "What a coincidence. At first, I was going to look for the goddess of magic, but I didn't find any clues, so I'm ready to give up on this plan." "The Archmage staff? Do you know where it is?" "The future." Ildes's weapon was the legendary Archmage staff. It was a terrifying divine weapon that appeared during the era of the Son of Massacre. For a long time before he met the goddess of magic, Ildes was looking for any clues related to the Archmage staff. However, it seemed like he had no intention of telling Soren the details at all. Soren didn't remember much about Ildes. He only vaguely remembered that Ildes had a very powerful enemy who killed his father. At first, he planned to use the power of the Archmage staff to deal with this enemy. Soren didn't care that much. What he cared about the most right now was to find the goddess of magic through Ildes. It would be best if they could communicate with each other as enemies. As for the Archmage's staff, it didn't matter. That thing had been sealed for thousands of years. To be honest, even if Soren didn't tell Ildes, he would still find clues in the end. As for whether he could take it out or not, it depended on the direction of the script. The difficulty of the Archmage's staff was level 27. Soren had a 70% chance of dying inside. In fact, he had always suspected that Ildes's ability to take out the Archmage's staff had something to do with the goddess of magic. Maybe the goddess of magic helped to break the seal. The Archmage's staff was one of the legendary divine weapons in the material plane. In terms of combat power, it was probably several times stronger than the Holy Avenger. During the era of the Son of Massacre, this divine weapon had a terrible impact. However, the Archmage's staff had been sealed several times, but it was always found with great difficulty. In the end, a god couldn't stand it anymore and personally came to the mortal world to seal this divine weapon. After that, only some legends were left in the material plane. The Archmage's staff was one of the most powerful divine weapons that appeared during the Avatar crisis. However, the most dramatic thing was that this staff was actually a melee staff. Ildes could become the most powerful wizard in the future. The first reason was naturally because he had the goddess of magic. His innate spell slots were much higher than other wizards, and he also inherited a small part of the divine power from the goddess of magic. The adventurers who had seen him in action at that time inferred that Ildes's talent, equipment, and other abilities, as well as the gift of the goddess of magic, had nearly twice as many spell slots as the wizards of the same level. This made it almost impossible for anyone in the material plane to exchange spells with him. His combat power was excellent. Another important reason was that he also held the legendary divine weapon, Archmage's staff. This divine weapon was not only powerful in combat, but also had a legendary spell that could be used to absorb the attack spells launched by the enemy and restore the spell slots used by the user. Ildes relied on these 2 points to be comparable to the Princess Royal of the Frost Kingdom. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.